The lobby of the Grand Horizon Hotel was bustling as guests arrived and departed, chatting in low voices while sipping on complimentary champagne. The marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of golden chandeliers, and the air smelled faintly of lavender, mingling with the rich scent of freshly brewed coffee from the cafe in the corner. It was the type of place where everything seemed perfect, a world unto itself, shielded from the messiness of the outside world. Dwayne Johnson, or as most people knew him, The Rock, walked through the doors, looking every bit the celebrity that he was. But today, he was just another guest, well, an extremely wealthy and somewhat reclusive guest. He'd booked a quiet getaway to clear his head after a grueling schedule of shoots and events. The last thing he expected was drama. As Dwayne approached the front desk, his presence didn't go unnoticed. A young waiter, Mark, in his late 20s, was stationed nearby, adjusting the collar of his shirt, hoping to look sharp. His shift had been long, and his patience was running thin. He had dealt with more than a few demanding guests, and the last thing he wanted was to deal with another rich guy who thought the world owed him something. Dwayne, dressed casually in a simple black hoodie and dark jeans, walked up to the counter with a soft smile, barely drawing attention to his towering frame. He greeted the receptionist in a calm tone, asking for his room keys. But Mark, who had been on edge all day, couldn't resist. He shot a quick glance at Dwayne, looking him up and down, sizing him up, and muttered just loud enough for him to hear. Another celebrity who thinks he's too good for the little people. Dwayne didn't react at first. He just let the comment hang in the air, unsure if Mark had even meant for him to hear it. But there it was, a jab, casual and bitter, coming from someone who had no idea who he was talking to. Mark's smirk faltered when he noticed Dwayne didn't flinch. Instead, Dwayne looked up at him with a slight raise of his eyebrow, almost as if he was silently asking, "Are you serious? What? Something wrong?" Mark pressed, his frustration getting the better of him. "I mean, this hotel could use a bit of humility, don't you think?" It was the type of statement Mark had said to guests countless times, sarcastic, cutting, but he never expected it to land on someone like Dwayne Johnson. Dwayne took a moment, and his eyes briefly flicked toward the manager who was overseeing the lobby. He could feel the tension in the air, the uneasy energy that had settled between them. He let out a small chuckle before replying with a calm, yet knowing tone. "You know, you're probably right. A little humility wouldn't hurt," Dwayne said, his voice low but steady, before turning back to the receptionist. Mark, however, wasn't done. His frustration got the best of him. "I mean, it's always the same, isn't it? The rich just walk in here like they own the place, getting all the perks while the rest of us bust our asses to keep this hotel running." Dwayne stood there, momentarily speechless, as the weight of Mark's words sunk in. This time, the joke wasn't funny, but the unspoken truth? Dwayne knew that Mark didn't realize who he was dealing with. No one in the lobby knew the real identity of the man standing right in front of them. Dwayne smiled faintly, trying to keep things light. "I guess I can see why you'd feel that way," he said, the slightest hint of amusement playing on his lips, "but you might want to hold off on the assumptions." Mark shrugged, clearly uninterested in further conversation. The sarcastic remark lingered in the air, and he walked off without another glance at Dwayne, moving to attend to a group of guests near the bar. Meanwhile, Dwayne lingered at the desk, his fingers tapping gently against the marble. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even offended, but he felt a shift, something that tugged at him, a sense of quiet disbelief. The world had gotten so divided, hadn't it? And in that brief exchange, it was clear Mark was looking for someone to lash out at, someone who would take the brunt of his frustration. But what Mark didn't know was that the man standing before him was more than just another rich guy in the hotel. Dwayne had worked his way up, from nothing, to owning this very place. Mark had no idea who he had just insulted, but Dwayne wasn't about to make a scene. Not today. Still, the question remained. What would happen when Mark found out who he had truly disrespected? As Dwayne took his room key from the receptionist, he made a mental note. There was something about Mark, something deep beneath the surface, that told him this wasn't just about a casual insult. It was about something much deeper. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was an opportunity here. A chance to show Mark a different side of the world. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Dwayne's voice echoed in his mind as he walked away, a playful thought crossing his mind. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? But for now, Dwayne couldn't help but wonder. What would Mark do when he realized the truth? Mark Collins had never planned to be a waiter. When he was younger, he had dreams, big dreams, of becoming something more, something better. But life had a way of throwing curveballs, and his dreams slipped further and further away as the years went by. His childhood wasn't the easiest. He grew up in a small apartment in a rundown neighborhood, with a mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. His father had left when Mark was just a baby, leaving behind a void that neither of them knew how to fill. The absence of a father figure left Mark feeling like he had to prove himself, even though no one was really asking him to. Mark had always been the type of person who took on responsibility. He worked hard through school, pushing through the difficult moments, hoping for something better on the other side. He graduated high school with decent grades, but reality had a cruel way of catching up with him. His plans to attend college had crumbled when his mother's health began to decline. Medical bills piled up, and Mark found himself juggling part-time jobs to keep things afloat. His dream of going to university was replaced with the more immediate goal of keeping his family from falling apart. The weight of responsibility weighed heavy on his shoulders. By the time he was 23, Mark was working full-time at various low-paying jobs, bars, restaurants, anything he could get his hands on. It was exhausting work, long hours on his feet, with little appreciation from customers or management. But it was money, and in the city, money was everything. So, he ended up at the Grand Horizon Hotel, a luxurious 5-star place that catered to high-profile guests, celebrities, businessmen, and the ultra-rich. Mark had been hired as a waiter, not because he was passionate about food or service, but because he needed the paycheck. The hours were long, the tips could be decent, and for someone like him, it was enough. But Mark wasn't happy. Far from it. He hated the way the guests looked at him, like he was invisible, nothing more than a servant meant to cater to their every whim. He hated the way they acted as if the world revolved around them, demanding perfection without ever offering a shred of respect. He wasn't proud of his job, but he had to keep reminding himself that it was just a temporary stop, a necessary evil to get him where he wanted to go. Still, every day felt like another grind, another reminder of how far he was from where he wanted to be. His coworkers were either too busy gossiping or too lost in their own drama to help him out, and his manager, well, let's just say the guy cared more about keeping up appearances than actually leading the team. And Mark's patience had begun to wear thin. It wasn't just the guests. It was everything. The low wages, the constant pressure, the lack of opportunity. He had tried, time and time again, to find something better, something that would allow him to escape this cycle. But every attempt had failed. He didn't have the connections, the education, or the luck that seemed to propel others forward. The final straw had come earlier that morning when his car broke down again. Another expensive repair he couldn't afford, but had to fix. And then there was his mother, still struggling with health issues that drained his time and energy. He loved her, of course, but sometimes it felt like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. He was tired, so tired. As he shuffled through the kitchen, preparing for yet another shift, Mark's eyes met the clock. The minutes dragged by, and he could already feel the tension building up in his chest. His shift had barely started, and already, he could sense the familiar feeling of frustration creeping in. The guests would be arriving soon, each one more demanding than the last, and he would have to put on the same fake smile, pretending everything was fine when it was anything but. But the real problem was that he was starting to resent it. Resent the hotel, resent the guests, and above all, resent himself for still being stuck in this place. As Mark prepared his uniform, he muttered under his breath, "I can't keep doing this. I'm better than this." But in his heart, Mark wasn't sure he believed it anymore. He had tried to climb the ladder, but each rung felt just out of reach. The dream of escaping his current life seemed as elusive as ever, and no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant for something more, but stuck in a life that told him otherwise. It was the same old story, the same routine, the same dead-end job. He hated the way the other waitstaff acted like they were so proud of the little tips they received, while the wealthy guests walked by, blissfully unaware of the effort it took to keep the place running. Mark leaned against the counter, staring out into the lobby. His eyes wandered over to the guests, all of them dressed in designer clothes, laughing, chatting, and carrying their expensive bags like they owned the world. And then his gaze settled on one guest in particular, a man who seemed out of place in the luxury of the Grand Horizon. The man was tall, with dark, piercing eyes and a confident air that spoke of someone who had seen it all. He wore a simple black hoodie, but there was something about him that set him apart from the rest. The man approached the front desk, looking like he had just walked out of a movie set. His casual demeanor contrasted sharply with the polished surroundings of the hotel. Mark rolled his eyes. "Probably just another rich guy who thinks the world revolves around him," he muttered under his breath. Little did he know, the man he had just insulted was the very person who owned the hotel. The Grand Horizon Hotel wasn't just another luxury resort. It was a symbol of success, a shining beacon in the world of high-end hospitality. Located in the heart of the city, it stood tall and proud, its glass windows reflecting the skyline like a monument to wealth and exclusivity. Guests arrived from all corners of the globe, drawn by its reputation for perfection, luxury, and service beyond compare. For the staff who worked there, the hotel was both a privilege and a pressure. Everyone who was hired knew they were expected to provide nothing less than the best, to meet every need of their high-profile clientele, no matter how extravagant or unreasonable. From the valets who opened doors to the concierges who organized private events, each person was carefully selected to embody the hotel's standard of excellence. But what truly set the Grand Horizon apart was its owner, an enigmatic figure whose presence loomed large over the hotel, but whose identity remained a mystery to the staff. Stories about the owner swirled around the hotel like whispers in the hallways. Some said he was a tech mogul, others claimed he was an heir to a vast fortune. There were rumors that he was a recluse, preferring to stay out of the spotlight and leaving the day-to-day operations to a trusted few. What everyone knew for sure was that he was a billionaire, and his wealth allowed the hotel to maintain its pristine reputation. Still, despite the rumors, very few employees had ever met the owner. It wasn't that the management team went out of their way to keep things secret. No, it was more like the owner simply didn't care about the day-to-day workings of the hotel. It was as if the business ran itself, and he was content to watch from the shadows. That was something that irked Mark. Not the mystery of the owner, but the way everyone in the hotel seemed to revere him without ever truly knowing him. He didn't get it. The owner didn't walk the halls, didn't interact with the staff, and certainly didn't seem to care about the employees who kept the hotel running. Yet, every manager, every concierge, every housekeeper spoke of him with a mixture of awe and fear. "Just don't upset the owner," the head of housekeeping had once told Mark, her eyes wide with concern. "You'll never work in this city again if he decides you're not worth the job." That warning had stuck with Mark. It wasn't the first time he had heard rumors about the owner's temper. Some of the older staff whispered about how the owner had fired people with the snap of a finger, leaving them scrambling for new jobs in a cutthroat industry. Others claimed he wasn't interested in the hotel's day-to-day operations, preferring to keep his distance. But no matter what, the reputation of the hotel had never faltered. The guests kept coming, the money kept flowing, and everyone around the hotel continued to treat it like the holy grail of luxury. Mark had never fully bought into the myth of the owner. To him, the guy was just another rich person who happened to own a hotel. Maybe he was successful, but that didn't mean he deserved the reverence that came with it. Mark had seen enough wealthy people acting entitled and arrogant to believe that the owner was any different. As the days passed, Mark continued to work his shifts at the Grand Horizon Hotel, but the bitterness inside him grew. The guests were as demanding as ever. The managers continued to push him harder than he thought possible, and he was still struggling to make ends meet. It was all a joke, really. A sick, twisted joke where the rich and powerful lived in their gilded cages, while the rest of the world picked up the scraps. One afternoon, as Mark was making his way through the lobby, his eyes caught a glimpse of a tall figure standing near the front desk. It was the same man from earlier, the one he had casually insulted, Dwayne Johnson, the man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine. Mark didn't think much of it at first. Guests came and went, and the hotel was filled with faces Mark didn't recognize. But there was something different about this guest. Something about the way he carried himself. There was a quiet confidence that Mark found both intriguing and frustrating. After all, it was hard to admire someone who, in his eyes, represented everything that was wrong with the world. But as he passed by, he noticed that Dwayne wasn't just another guest. There was something about him that didn't quite fit with the typical celebrity. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards, and he didn't have the usual entourage trailing behind him. He was just there, quiet, almost like he was trying to blend in with the regular guests, even though his very presence made it impossible. Mark's curiosity gnawed at him. Why was someone like Dwayne Johnson here? What did he want from the hotel? He didn't seem the type to be bothered with the little things that most guests cared about. The luxury spas, the exclusive suites, the designer shopping experiences that the hotel offered. No, Dwayne seemed different. There was something about him that made Mark think that maybe he wasn't like the others. Of course, Mark didn't know the truth. He didn't know that Dwayne was the owner of the Grand Horizon Hotel, that the hotel, in fact, was his brainchild. The one person everyone at the hotel revered was the very person Mark had so casually insulted earlier. As Mark continued his shift, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Maybe it was just his own frustration. Maybe it was something deeper. But something told him that the events of the day weren't as insignificant as they seemed. There was a shift in the air, a change that was about to happen. What Mark didn't know was that this was the beginning of a story that would completely change the course of his life. It wasn't just about the hotel anymore. It wasn't just about the owner who everyone feared. It was about him, and the unexpected lessons he was about to learn. The days passed uneventfully for Mark at the Grand Horizon Hotel, but there was a strange tension in the air. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing, something beyond the typical chaos of daily service. Perhaps it was just his exhaustion, or perhaps it was the weight of his own frustration coming to a head. Whatever it was, he couldn't ignore it. Mark continued to work the same routine, tending to the usual guests with a smile he didn't feel and pretending like everything was fine. The upscale patrons, oblivious to the stresses of the staff, carried on as if the world existed solely to cater to them. The waitstaff, including Mark, were just figures moving behind the scenes, handing out plates of gourmet food, refilling drinks, and answering requests as though it were second nature. There was nothing new, nothing that stood out, until Dwayne showed up again. This time, Mark noticed him more keenly. It wasn't just that Dwayne was hard to miss. He had a magnetic presence that made people look twice. But it was more than that. As Dwayne strolled through the lobby with his casual yet confident gait, Mark couldn't help but think that he didn't quite fit in here. Not in the way the hotel's other affluent guests did. Mark watched from the bar area as Dwayne greeted the hotel manager, Susan, with a handshake. His posture was relaxed, almost nonchalant, but Mark noticed how Susan's face brightened when she saw him. She was all smiles, her posture suddenly straighter, her tone warmer. It wasn't the kind of reception you gave to any regular guest. This was the kind of treatment reserved for the VIPs, the ones who made a difference. Mark didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just any VIP. Dwayne wasn't here for a brief stay or a simple luxury experience. He was the one who owned it all. He was the one who made decisions that affected everyone within the hotel, the one whose presence shaped the very heart of the Grand Horizon. Dwayne continued through the lobby, slipping unnoticed into a private lounge area. No one dared to stop him. As usual, the staff worked around him, ensuring everything remained perfect. Mark, though, couldn't help but feel an odd sense of curiosity building inside him. He had overheard hushed conversations about the owner, whispers that seemed to reinforce the myth that he was some sort of invisible titan of industry, a shadowy figure whose name everyone knew but whose face was rarely seen. The truth was, the staff rarely saw him. He didn't come to the hotel often, choosing instead to run his empire from behind the scenes. The owners of the Grand Horizon were more of a rumor than a reality, especially to the lowly waitstaff like Mark. But Mark was wrong to assume that Dwayne was just another rich guy who could disappear into the anonymity of wealth. The reality was far more complicated and far more personal. Later that evening, as Mark was closing up his section in the restaurant, he was summoned by Susan to meet with someone in the manager's office. He was exhausted and irritated, wondering why his supervisor needed him now of all times. When he entered the office, his eyes went immediately to the man standing by the window, Dwayne Johnson. Mark's breath caught in his throat. There he was, standing tall, the man he had insulted earlier. He looked different now, more grounded, more real. His energy filled the room in a way that made Mark feel small, almost as if the walls were closing in. "Mark," Susan's voice broke through his thoughts. "This is Mr. Johnson. He's the owner of the hotel. He wanted to speak with you." Mark's heart raced. The owner? It was as if the room had tilted on its axis. The man he had made fun of, the one he had judged as just another celebrity guest, was the one who controlled it all, the one who held the power. Dwayne turned to face him, a faint but knowing smile on his lips. "Mark," he said, his voice calm and deep, "I wanted to have a word with you. I understand we got off on the wrong foot earlier." Mark's face went red. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. This was real. The man was standing here, addressing him directly, and it felt like the whole world had just shifted beneath his feet. "I'm sorry," Mark stammered, feeling a pang of humiliation. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean to offend you." Dwayne waved a hand, dismissing his apology with a relaxed gesture. "No need to apologize. I understand where you're coming from. I'm just a guy, right? The rich guy who walks in and expects everything to be perfect." Mark nodded sheepishly, his mind spinning. It was surreal. The man he had insulted had just calmly acknowledged it, without raising his voice or making a scene. He expected some sort of confrontation, but Dwayne seemed remarkably laid back about it. "You know," Dwayne continued, "I wasn't always like this. I didn't always have everything I wanted. I know how it feels to struggle, to want something better for yourself and feel like you can't get there." Mark wasn't sure what to say. His initial response was skepticism. How could this guy, with all his wealth, understand what it's like to struggle? Dwayne's eyes softened. "I built this hotel from the ground up, Mark. And I didn't get here by stepping on people. I got here by learning from my mistakes, by understanding others, and by realizing that respect goes both ways." The words hit Mark harder than he expected. Here was this billionaire, this man who had everything, talking about struggle and respect as if he understood the daily grind. The same grind that Mark faced every single day. It was a humbling moment, one that made him feel small in ways he hadn't anticipated. Dwayne took a step closer, his voice lowering. "You know, Mark, when I first opened this hotel, I wanted it to be more than just a place to stay. I wanted it to be a place where people could connect, where they could feel like they belonged, whether they were the guest or the staff. It's about building something meaningful, something lasting." Mark stood there, his thoughts racing. Could this man, this wealthy owner, really understand? Could he have been in Mark's shoes once? The conversation lingered in the air, and for the first time that day, Mark felt a small spark of something. Hope, perhaps, or the faintest possibility that maybe things could be different. Dwayne glanced at him one last time before speaking. "I'll let you get back to work, Mark. But remember, there's always more than one way to view a situation. Sometimes, it's about seeing things from a different perspective." Mark's mind swirled as he walked out of the office. The evening had been a revelation. He had just encountered the owner of the hotel in the most unexpected way possible, and he realized, not for the first time, that things weren't always as they seemed. The encounter with Dwayne Johnson had left Mark in a state of stunned silence. He hadn't expected that kind of conversation. In fact, he hadn't expected anything at all. The man who owned the Grand Horizon Hotel had just casually walked up to him, acknowledged the awkward situation, and spoken to him like a peer, as if Mark wasn't just another waiter in a long line of invisible staff members. It wasn't just the words Dwayne had spoken. It was the way he carried himself, his calm demeanor, his genuine interest in Mark's well-being, even if it was just for a brief moment. Mark couldn't stop thinking about the conversation as he went about his usual duties in the following days. As he served meals, cleared dishes, and moved through the chaotic, fast-paced rhythms of the restaurant floor, he kept replaying the words Dwayne had said to him. Sometimes, it's about seeing things from a different perspective. Mark had never really been good at changing his perspective. He was stuck in his own cycle of frustrations, his own feelings of being trapped in a dead-end job with no clear path out. Every day felt like the same, monotonous routine. Wake up, go to work, serve demanding customers, go home, rinse, repeat. The hotel, for all its grandeur, only reminded him of what he didn't have, the life he thought he deserved, the wealth, the freedom, the opportunities that seemed so far out of his reach. But Dwayne, he had made it. He had built all of this from the ground up. He wasn't some anonymous, disconnected billionaire who spent his time lounging in private jets and exclusive resorts. No, Dwayne seemed different. He spoke about struggle and respect in a way that Mark could almost understand. And there was something else, too. There was an honesty in Dwayne's voice, an authenticity that Mark had never expected from someone at his level. Mark continued to serve the guests with his usual tired politeness, but now there was something else in his thoughts, a question, a flicker of curiosity. What if? What if there was more to life than just scraping by? What if there was a chance for Mark to change his circumstances, to reach for something better? He hadn't considered it before, not seriously. But now, after his conversation with Dwayne, the possibility seemed almost real. That was when the opportunity arrived. It came in the form of a simple message, a small detail that most would overlook. Mark had just finished serving a table when Susan, the hotel manager, pulled him aside. "Mark, we've had a last-minute cancellation for an important event in the VIP lounge tonight," she said briskly, flipping through a stack of papers on her clipboard. "We need someone to step up and take charge of the service there. It's a private event, a big one, and the client is very particular. It's important, and I need someone who can handle it. You think you can do it?" Mark blinked, caught off guard. It wasn't that he wasn't capable. He was more than used to handling tough situations. But this was different. This wasn't just another night in the restaurant. This was a VIP event. He had seen the kind of guests who frequented the lounge: high-powered executives, celebrities, and socialites, each one more demanding than the last. To be chosen for this event felt like a huge leap. I can do it," Mark said, not quite believing the words himself. Susan raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by his quick response. She studied him for a moment, as though weighing his abilities before giving him a small nod. "Good. You'll report to the VIP lounge in 20 minutes. Be sharp. This is important, Mark. Don't mess it up." Mark's heart was pounding in his chest as he made his way to the lounge. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. He had been given a chance. It was rare for someone like him to get a shot at the kind of recognition that came with handling one of the hotel's most prestigious events. He could feel the eyes of the higher-ups on him now. This could be his moment to prove himself. As he stepped into the VIP lounge, Mark immediately felt the weight of the atmosphere. The space was large and opulent, with expensive furniture, dim lighting, and soft music playing in the background. A few guests were already mingling, each one dressed in sharp, designer clothes, their laughter and conversation adding to the room's air of exclusivity. A handful of waiters and staff were already moving between the guests, offering drinks and hors d'oeuvres with practiced ease. Mark straightened his uniform, adjusting his tie as he surveyed the room. This was a different world than what he was used to. A world where people didn't have to worry about bills or rent or how to make ends meet. This was the world he dreamed about. The world that seemed so far away from the hotel's back kitchen, where he spent most of his time. But this was his chance. He couldn't afford to screw it up. He took a deep breath and approached the event coordinator, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, who was overseeing the proceedings. "I'm Mark. I've been assigned to help with tonight's event," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness that bubbled under the surface. Claire nodded curtly, her eyes scanning him for a moment. "Good. Just follow the flow of things and keep everything running smoothly. The client is picky, so don't take any chances." The night went by in a blur of activity, serving drinks, coordinating with the kitchen, ensuring that the guests were comfortable and satisfied. Mark was on his toes the entire time, watching the guests' every move, anticipating their needs before they even voiced them. It was chaotic, but he thrived in the chaos. Every small mistake was magnified in this high-stakes environment, and Mark couldn't afford to let anything slip. He worked with precision, staying calm and focused even when the pressure mounted. And then, Toward the end of the evening, Mark found himself face to face with the client, none other than Dwayne Johnson. Mark froze for a moment, surprised to see him here. The celebrity owner of the hotel was, of course, a familiar face around the lobby, but he didn't typically engage with the day-to-day operations of the hotel. He was usually a ghost, appearing only when necessary, leaving the management to others. To see him at this event, where he could have easily been a guest instead of a participant, threw Mark off balance for a second. Dwayne noticed him right away, his smile genuine as he walked toward Mark. "You're doing great, Mark," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I've been watching you tonight, and I'm impressed." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'm just doing my best." "You've got potential," Dwayne said, his tone warm. "I see you're serious about your work. Not everyone has that." Mark felt a strange surge of pride. No one had ever spoken to him like this before, not with such recognition, such validation. It was more than just the compliment. It was the acknowledgement of his hard work, his effort. It was something he hadn't realized he'd been craving. "Keep it up," Dwayne added, before turning back to the group of guests he had been mingling with. "I'll be watching." Mark stood there, stunned for a moment. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, but it didn't matter anymore. He had done it. He had handled the pressure, the chaos, and most importantly, he had earned the recognition of the man who owned it all. As he cleaned up and finally made his way to the staff exit, Mark felt something inside him shift, a sense of possibility he had never felt before. The doors of opportunity, once closed, were beginning to crack open, and this time, he wasn't going to let them slam shut again. The days that followed Mark's performance at the VIP event seemed to pass in a blur. He couldn't stop thinking about it, the way Dwayne Johnson had acknowledged his hard work, the recognition he had received in front of the hotel's high-powered guests. It wasn't just another night of serving drinks and clearing plates. It felt different. Mark had stepped out of the shadows, if only for a moment, and shown that he had what it took to thrive in a world that seemed far removed from his own. That evening, after he had finished his shift and clocked out, Mark walked out of the hotel and into the quiet city streets, his mind racing. He had always felt like he was stuck in a rut. The hotel, for all its luxury and prestige, had felt like a cage. A gilded one, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. But now, something had changed. He wasn't just a waiter anymore. He was someone who could rise above the ordinary, someone who could make a name for himself. It was a feeling he had longed for but never truly believed he could achieve. As he walked, Mark replayed Dwayne's words in his mind. "You've got potential. I see you're serious about your work." The compliment felt like a validation he hadn't even realized he needed. It wasn't just about being noticed. It was about being seen for who he truly was, a person with potential, with drive, with a future beyond the confines of the restaurant floor. But what did that future look like? Mark didn't know yet, but the possibility of something more, something beyond waiting tables and surviving paycheck to paycheck, felt real for the first time. The next day, as Mark arrived for his shift, something unexpected happened. As he entered the break room to grab his uniform, Susan called him over. There was a look in her eyes, something that wasn't typical for her, usually the picture of professionalism and cool detachment. "Mark," she said, her voice unusually calm, "I need to talk to you." He followed her into the hallway, his mind already racing. Had he done something wrong? Was this about the VIP event? Susan stopped and faced him, her expression serious but not unkind. "We've got an opening in the management team. I think you're the right person for it." Mark blinked in confusion. "Management? Me?" He almost laughed, but Susan's serious look told him this wasn't a joke. "Yeah, you," she said, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "I've seen the way you handled yourself during that event. I've been keeping an eye on you, Mark. You've got the skills, more than most of the others, honestly. You've got the potential to do more than just serve food and drinks. We need someone who can think on their feet, who can manage under pressure. Someone who understands what this hotel represents." Mark's heart raced as the weight of her words sank in. He had never imagined himself in a management role. To him, management was a distant world of board meetings and fancy suits. He was just a guy who brought food to tables and dealt with angry customers. But Susan seemed to believe in him, believe in something he hadn't fully realized himself. "You want me to be a manager?" Mark asked, still unsure if he was hearing things correctly. Susan nodded. "Yes. There's an assistant manager position opening up. You'll start by shadowing one of the senior managers, learning the ropes. If you do well, it could be yours." Mark's mind raced. This was a huge opportunity, a chance to move up, to do something beyond what he had ever dreamed of. But at the same time, doubts crept in. Could he really handle it? Could he make the leap from waiter to manager? It was a big jump, one that required confidence and skill, things that Mark had only recently begun to realize he possessed. "I don't know," Mark trailed off, unsure of himself. "I mean, I've never done anything like this before. I don't know if I'm cut out for management." Susan's expression softened. "Listen, I wouldn't be offering this if I didn't think you were capable. You've shown that you have what it takes. The job isn't easy, but it's yours if you want it. You have the potential to do more than just serve food, Mark. You have the potential to be a part of something bigger." Mark stood there, trying to process it all. This was the moment of truth. He could stay in his comfort zone, continue doing what he knew best, or he could take a risk, challenge himself, and try something new. It was terrifying, but it was also thrilling. "I'll do it," Mark said, the words slipping out before he could second-guess himself. "I'll give it a shot." Susan smiled. "Good. You'll start training next week. In the meantime, keep up the great work. This is just the beginning, Mark." As he walked back to the staff area to change into his uniform, Mark's mind was still spinning. He had just agreed to something that felt like a giant leap forward. A management position at the Grand Horizon Hotel. The thought still felt surreal. But as he walked to his section on the restaurant floor, something inside him felt different. There was a quiet confidence growing within him, a new sense of purpose. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't destined to stay stuck in the same cycle of frustration and complacency. Maybe he was on the verge of something more. The rest of the shift passed by in a haze, Mark going through the motions but his mind far away, already imagining what this new opportunity could mean for him. And when he clocked out that night, he didn't just feel relief. He felt something else, a sense of anticipation, a flicker of hope for what was to come. Later that evening, as Mark sat in his small apartment, exhausted from the long day, he found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. The hotel, the guests, the endless parade of luxury and wealth. It all seemed so distant now. But in a way, it was no longer as intimidating. He wasn't just a small cog in the machine anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that could lead him to a life he had only dared to dream about. As he closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep, Mark couldn't help but wonder where this new path would take him. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was moving forward, not just surviving, but thriving. The first few days of Mark's management training felt like a whirlwind. He had no idea just how much went into running a hotel. From the way the kitchen staff coordinated with servers, to managing guest relations, to the intricate financial logistics that kept everything running smoothly. There was more to it than he could have imagined. And the responsibility weighed heavily on him. Every decision he made had consequences, and he was now accountable for ensuring that everything ran seamlessly. The assistant manager he was shadowing, Rachel, was a seasoned pro. She had been with the hotel for over 5 years and knew every corner of the operation. She moved through the hotel with an ease and confidence that Mark couldn't help but admire. Rachel was sharp, always calm under pressure, and incredibly efficient. She had a way of managing people that made everyone feel valued and heard, even if they were just cleaning staff or servers. Mark had never seen this side of the hotel before. When he was just a waiter, he had only interacted with the guests and other staff on the surface level. But now, seeing the inner workings of the operation, he began to understand just how complex it was. There were countless moving parts, each one contributing to the whole. And if one part faltered, the entire system could fall apart. As Mark worked closely with Rachel, he started to feel a growing sense of pride in what he was doing. It wasn't just about bringing food to tables anymore. It was about overseeing an experience, making sure the guests had everything they needed, ensuring that the hotel's standards were met, and that the staff felt supported and motivated. It was a big job, but Mark was starting to see why it mattered. One afternoon, Rachel had him sit in on a meeting with the hotel's general manager, David. The meeting was about upcoming renovations, guest feedback, and potential changes to the hotel's policies. Mark felt out of his depth at first, listening to the discussion about budgets, contracts, and operational goals. But as the meeting continued, he began to catch on. He saw how everything tied together. The big picture. David, the general manager, was direct and no-nonsense, but he seemed to have a respect for Mark's potential. He often turned to Mark during the meeting, asking for his input, which surprised him. Mark wasn't sure he was ready to offer his own opinions yet, but he did his best to stay engaged and attentive. Later, after the meeting ended, David stopped Mark before he could leave the conference room. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Mark," David said, his tone measured but sincere. "It's clear that you're not just here to go through the motions. Keep it up." Mark nodded, though he didn't quite know how to respond. Keep it up. Those words were starting to feel like a mantra, a reminder that he wasn't just faking his way through this. It was real. He was moving up, and the people around him were beginning to notice. But with the rise in responsibility came the inevitable challenges. The first real test came during a major corporate event held at the hotel, a group of high-profile executives from a tech company. They had reserved the hotel's grand ballroom for a conference, and the stakes were higher than ever. Rachel was managing the event, but she would be leaving early to attend to another task. That meant Mark was in charge of overseeing the dinner service, ensuring the guests were comfortable, and dealing with any issues that arose. As the evening approached, Mark felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew the pressure was on. This wasn't just another event. The guests at this dinner were important, and they expected perfection. There could be no mistakes. He arrived at the ballroom early, walking through the large, elegant space as the staff set up. The long tables were adorned with white linens, crystal glasses, and exquisite floral arrangements. Waiters and bartenders moved swiftly, making last-minute adjustments. Mark reviewed the guest list, the menu, and the schedule, checking everything twice to make sure there were no surprises. Just as things were falling into place, he received a call from the kitchen. "There's an issue with one of the dishes," the chef, Antonio, said, his voice tinged with frustration. "The special entree for the vegetarian guest is missing an ingredient. We're trying to make do, but it might take longer than we thought." Mark's heart skipped a beat. If they couldn't deliver the right dish, the whole dinner service would be compromised. The last thing he needed was an unhappy guest, especially at an event like this. He rushed to the kitchen, trying to think on his feet. Antonio was already scrambling, and Mark could see the stress on his face. "Can we substitute something else? Maybe a different dish for the vegetarian guest?" Mark suggested, trying to find a quick solution. Antonio shook his head. "I don't want to send out a dish that doesn't meet the guest's expectations. It needs to be perfect." Mark nodded, understanding. They couldn't compromise on quality, especially when dealing with high-profile guests. After a few moments of tense silence, he had an idea. "Okay, let's do this," Mark said, his mind racing with a plan. "We'll take one of the vegetarian entrees from the regular menu. It's simple, but it's just as good. We can make a last-minute alteration, and I'll personally serve it to the guest. If it's not what they expected, I'll make sure they're compensated. We'll get ahead of the issue." Antonio hesitated for a moment before nodding in agreement. "It's a risk, but it might work." Mark quickly coordinated with the kitchen staff and the waiters. As the dinner began, everything else went off without a hitch. The guests seemed satisfied with their meals, the atmosphere was lively, and there was a steady flow of conversation in the air. But Mark's mind stayed focused on that one guest, the vegetarian who might soon notice the difference in the dish. The moment arrived. He spotted the guest, an executive who had been particularly vocal about his preferences earlier, sitting at the table near the center. He was just about to take a bite of his altered entree when Mark approached the table. "Good evening, sir. How is everything? Is the meal to your liking?" Mark asked, his voice steady despite the nerves that were building inside him. The executive glanced down at the plate, inspecting the dish. Mark's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to maintain eye contact and wait for the verdict. To his surprise, the executive smiled, nodding with approval. "It's excellent. I appreciate the change. Very thoughtful." Mark let out a silent breath of relief, his shoulders relaxing as the tension melted away. The night continued, and no one seemed to notice the minor hiccup in the kitchen. The dinner ended smoothly, and the guests were content. Mark had successfully handled his first major crisis in management, and he could already feel his confidence growing with each passing task. After the event, Rachel came to find him in the staff lounge. "Good job tonight," she said, a genuine smile on her face. "I saw how you handled that issue in the kitchen. You kept it together, and that's what matters most." Mark smiled, feeling a sense of pride settle in his chest. "Thanks. I was a little nervous, but it worked out." "It did. And that's exactly what I wanted to see from you," Rachel said. "You're handling this management stuff better than you think." The next morning, as Mark prepared for another day of training, he felt different. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. He was part of something bigger. He wasn't just a waiter or a new assistant manager. He was a decision maker, someone whose choices impacted the success of the hotel. As the days went on, Mark realized that this opportunity was more than just a job. It was a challenge, a test of his limits, and the first step in a new chapter of his life. And he was ready for it. The days following Mark's successful handling of the corporate event seemed to blur together. The steady rhythm of training, meetings, and tasks felt like it was becoming a second nature to him. He was settling into the role of assistant manager, no longer overwhelmed by the complexities of hotel operations. There was a new confidence in his step, a quiet but steady assurance that he belonged in this world. But even as he gained confidence, he knew that he hadn't yet faced a challenge that would truly test his leadership. That test came sooner than he expected. It was a Thursday afternoon when the first major problem arose. Mark was working the lunch shift when an unexpected issue escalated. The hotel was hosting a large wedding reception that evening, and preparations had been underway for days. But when Mark arrived on the floor, he was immediately pulled into a meeting with Susan and Rachel. "We've hit a bit of a snag," Susan began, her tone unusually tight. The flower vendor, who was supposed to provide all the floral arrangements for the reception, backed out last minute. "They say they're having supply issues. The wedding coordinator is panicking, and the bride is about to lose it. We need a solution, and fast." Mark's heart skipped. He'd seen the stressed-out brides before, the ones who feared that every detail of their wedding day might unravel at the last minute. But this was bigger. The floral arrangements were one of the most critical elements of the wedding's decor. Without them, the entire event would be thrown off course. "Do we have any other options?" Mark asked, his mind racing through potential solutions. He wasn't a florist, but he was starting to think like a manager, finding the quickest and most effective way to solve the problem. Rachel, who had already been on the phone with several other vendors, frowned. "We don't have much time, and the best we could do is get half of the flowers from another supplier. It won't match the original plan." Susan turned to Mark. "I need you to take the reins here. We need someone to smooth things over with the bride and wedding coordinator. You need to assure them that we've got it under control, and that we'll make it work. Meanwhile, Rachel and I will handle the logistics with the supplier." Mark's stomach churned. This was his first real test as a leader. He wasn't just handling the details of an event anymore. He was the one who had to maintain calm, manage expectations, and ensure the client didn't walk away with a bad experience. It was a lot of pressure, but it was also an opportunity to prove himself. He nodded. Understood. As he made his way to the ballroom where the wedding coordinator and bride were anxiously awaiting answers, Mark tried to collect his thoughts. He had to act quickly, but he also had to be reassuring. The last thing he needed was to add to the stress that already hung in the air. When he arrived at the ballroom, he was met by the frantic wedding coordinator, Tanya, who was pacing back and forth. The bride, Amanda, was sitting at a table with her arms crossed, looking every bit the picture of a woman who feared her dream wedding was slipping through her fingers. "Mark." Tanya practically jumped out of her seat when she saw him. "You need to fix this. The flowers were everything. We can't have this wedding without them. The bride will kill me." Mark took a deep breath and stepped forward. He knew the pressure was on, but he refused to let it show. He smiled warmly at Amanda, though he could see the distress in her eyes. "Ms. Amanda, I completely understand how important the flowers are for your wedding, and I promise you, we are working hard to make sure everything looks just as you envisioned it. There's been a small hiccup with our vendor, but we're taking care of it. I'll personally ensure that your wedding will be flawless. We won't let you down." Amanda looked up at him, still tense, but something in his calm demeanor seemed to put her at ease. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice wavering. "This was supposed to be the perfect day. I've been planning this for months." Mark sat down next to her, his voice low and reassuring. "I understand, and I know how much this day means to you. Here's what I can promise. We've found a backup plan for the flowers. It's not exactly the same, but we will make it work. I'll keep you updated every step of the way. We'll get it right. I've seen our team do some incredible things under pressure, and I'm confident we can turn this around." For a moment, Amanda didn't respond. Her eyes locked on him as if trying to gauge whether he was being sincere. Mark didn't look away. He knew that in times like this, it wasn't just about words. It was about presence, about showing that he was someone who could be trusted to lead in a crisis. After what felt like an eternity, Amanda finally sighed and nodded. "Okay, I trust you. Just, please, don't let anything else go wrong." Mark gave her a reassuring smile. "I won't. You have my word." As he stood up to leave the room, Tanya followed him out. "That was impressive," she said, shaking her head. "I thought for sure she was going to lose it, but you calmed her down." Mark smiled, though it felt more like a mask than true confidence. Inside, he was still processing everything that had just happened. His first real leadership role, and he had pulled it off. But he knew the hard part wasn't over. There were still the flowers to deal with and a wedding to host, and the clock was ticking. The hours that followed were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and back-and-forth arrangements. Mark stayed in constant communication with Rachel and Susan, making sure the backup flowers were on their way, handling last-minute details, and checking in on the bride and wedding coordinator every half hour. By the time the evening rolled around, everything seemed to be falling into place. The flowers, though not identical to the original design, had arrived, and the ballroom had been transformed into a beautiful, romantic setting. Mark could see Amanda's face light up as she walked into the room, her worries visibly melting away. The guests were arriving, and the event was proceeding smoothly. When the reception started, Mark stood off to the side, watching as the guests mingled and celebrated. He felt a sense of pride swelling in his chest. He had stepped up, handled the pressure, and delivered. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough, and the bride was happy. Later that night, as the last guest began to leave, Mark was approached by Rachel. "You did well tonight," she said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You really stepped up when it counted." Mark smiled, exhaustion creeping into his bones. "Thanks. I wasn't sure I could do it, but it worked out." Rachel gave him a knowing look. "That's the thing about leadership, Mark. You don't always know if you can handle it until you have no choice but to try. You did more than just handle it tonight. You owned it." Mark nodded, a sense of pride and accomplishment washing over him. He hadn't just solved a problem. He had led a team through a crisis and come out the other side stronger. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Mark sat in his office, staring at the stacks of paperwork on his desk. It had been a whirlwind few weeks since the wedding crisis, and he was starting to feel the weight of his responsibilities. The hotel had a steady stream of events, conferences, and high-profile guests to accommodate, and he was juggling it all, ensuring smooth operations, managing the team, and still learning the ropes of hotel management. Some days, it felt like he was doing nothing more than putting out fires. He glanced at his phone as a notification popped up. It was a text from Rachel. "Hey, can you meet me in the lobby? Need to talk to you about something important." Mark frowned. His curiosity piqued. He had a lot on his plate already, but he respected Rachel and knew that whatever she needed to discuss was likely critical. He grabbed his notebook and left the office, walking quickly through the corridors of the hotel. When he reached the lobby, Rachel was waiting by the front desk, her arms crossed and a serious look on her face. As soon as she saw him, she motioned for him to follow her toward the back office. "What's going on?" Mark asked, concern creeping into his voice. Rachel rarely seemed rattled, but today was different. Rachel sighed as she closed the door behind them. "We've got a problem. It's bigger than we thought." Mark raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" We just got word from corporate that they're considering selling the hotel, Rachel said, her voice heavy. They've been in talks with a potential buyer for a few months, and now it's moving forward faster than expected. Mark's stomach dropped. He had heard rumors around the hotel about potential changes, but he hadn't thought much of them. A hotel sale wasn't something that happened overnight, or at least he hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. Are you serious? Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why now? Apparently, the hotel hasn't been as profitable as they hoped, and they think a sale might be the best option to recoup their losses, Rachel explained. It's all about the numbers. Corporate doesn't care about the personal connections we've built here. They're focused on maximizing profits, and this hotel might be worth more to them if it's in the hands of a larger chain. Mark ran a hand through his hair. He couldn't believe it. This place, this hotel, had become a huge part of his life over the last few months. The people, the environment, the growth he was experiencing. To think it might all be sold off to a corporation felt like a punch in the gut. So what happens now? Mark asked, feeling a sense of dread settle in. Rachel's eyes darkened. I don't know. We don't even have all the details. But one thing is clear. We need to prepare for changes. It could be a change in leadership, restructuring, or even layoffs. No one's safe, and the uncertainty is going to shake things up for a while. Mark leaned against the wall, absorbing the news. How are the staff taking it? Do they know yet? Not yet, Rachel replied. But the gossip's already started. There's talk of layoffs, restructuring, and people wondering if they'll still have jobs after the sale goes through. It's going to be a nightmare if this isn't handled right. Mark stood up straighter, trying to push aside the sinking feeling in his stomach. So what do we do? What can we do? We can control how we handle things internally. Our team needs leadership right now. Real leadership. They need to feel like they have some kind of stability, even if it's just for the moment. When he reached the lobby, Rachel was waiting by the front desk, her arms crossed and a serious look on her face. As soon as she saw him, she motioned for him to follow her toward the back office. What's going on? Mark asked, concern creeping into his voice. Rachel rarely seemed rattled, but today was different. Rachel sighed as she closed the door behind them. We've got a problem. It's bigger than we thought. Mark raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? We just got word from corporate that they're considering selling the hotel, Rachel said, her voice heavy. They've been in talks with a potential buyer for a few months, and now it's moving forward faster than expected. Mark's stomach dropped. He had heard rumors around the hotel about potential changes, but he hadn't thought much of them. A hotel sale wasn't something that happened overnight, or at least he hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. Are you serious? Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why now? Apparently, the hotel hasn't been as profitable as they hoped, and they think a sale might be the best option to recoup their losses, Rachel explained. It's all about the numbers. Corporate doesn't care about the personal connections we've built here. They're focused on maximizing profits, and this hotel might be worth more to them if it's in the hands of a larger chain. Mark ran a hand through his hair. He couldn't believe it. This place, this hotel, had become a huge part of his life over the last few months. The people, the environment, the growth he was experiencing. To think it might all be sold off to a corporation felt like a punch in the gut. So what happens now? Mark asked, feeling a sense of dread settle in. Rachel's eyes darkened. I don't know. We don't even have all the details. But one thing is clear. We need to prepare for changes. It could be a change in leadership, restructuring, or even layoffs. No one's safe, and the uncertainty is going to shake things up for a while. Mark leaned against the wall, absorbing the news. How are the staff taking it? Do they know yet? Not yet, Rachel replied. But the gossip's already started. There's talk of layoffs, restructuring, and people wondering if they'll still have jobs after the sale goes through. It's going to be a nightmare if this isn't handled right. Mark stood up straighter, trying to push aside the sinking feeling in his stomach. So what do we do? What can we do? Rachel stared at him, her expression serious. We need to prepare the team. If this deal goes through, there will be a lot of uncertainty. We can't control the decision from corporate, but we can control how we handle things internally. Our team needs leadership right now. Real leadership. They need to feel like they have some kind of stability, even if it's just for the moment. When he reached the lobby, Rachel was waiting by the front desk, her arms crossed and a serious look on her face. As soon as she saw him, she motioned for him to follow her toward the back office. "What's going on?" Mark asked, concern creeping into his voice. Rachel rarely seemed rattled, but today was different. Rachel sighed as she closed the door behind them. "We've got a problem. It's bigger than we thought." Mark raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "We just got word from corporate that they're considering selling the hotel," Rachel said, her voice heavy. "They've been in talks with a potential buyer for a few months, and now it's moving forward faster than expected." Mark's stomach dropped. He had heard rumors around the hotel about potential changes, but he hadn't thought much of them. A hotel sale wasn't something that happened overnight, or at least he hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. "Are you serious?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why now?" "Apparently, the hotel hasn't been as profitable as they hoped, and they think a sale might be the best option to recoup their losses," Rachel explained. "It's all about the numbers. Corporate doesn't care about the personal connections we've built here. They're focused on maximizing profits, and this hotel might be worth more to them if it's in the hands of a larger chain." Mark ran a hand through his hair. He couldn't believe it. This place, this hotel, had become a huge part of his life over the last few months. The people, the environment, the growth he was experiencing. To think it might all be sold off to a corporation felt like a punch in the gut. "So what happens now?" Mark asked, feeling a sense of dread settle in. Rachel's eyes darkened. "I don't know. We don't even have all the details. But one thing is clear. We need to prepare for changes. It could be a change in leadership, restructuring, or even layoffs. No one's safe, and the uncertainty is going to shake things up for a while." Mark leaned against the wall, absorbing the news. "How are the staff taking it? Do they know yet?" "Not yet," Rachel replied. "But the gossip's already started. There's talk of layoffs, restructuring, and people wondering if they'll still have jobs after the sale goes through. It's going to be a nightmare if this isn't handled right." Mark stood up straighter, trying to push aside the sinking feeling in his stomach. "So what do we do? What can we do?" Rachel stared at him, her expression serious. "We need to prepare the team. If this deal goes through, there will be a lot of uncertainty. We can't control the decision from corporate, but we can control how we handle things internally. Our team needs leadership right now, real leadership. They need to feel like they have some kind of stability, even if it's just for the moment." Mark's mind was spinning. He had only just begun to feel like he was in control of his own role here, but now it seemed as if the very foundation of the hotel was at risk. But Rachel was right. The staff would need someone to steer them through this storm, and as much as Mark had only just begun to grow into his leadership role, this was his moment. The team needed a leader, someone who could keep morale up, even in the face of uncertainty. "I'll do it," Mark said, the words coming out with more conviction than he felt. "I'll talk to the staff, keep them focused. I'll do whatever I can to hold things together." Rachel gave him a sharp look. "I know you will. And Mark, I'm glad you're stepping up. But just remember, you can't do this alone. You've got a team here. Don't forget about that." Mark nodded. He knew that Rachel was right. He couldn't carry the weight of the hotel on his shoulders alone. He needed to trust his team, just like they trusted him. The next few days were a blur. Mark spent his time communicating with the staff, assuring them that the hotel was operating as usual, despite the corporate uncertainty hanging in the air. He tried his best to maintain a sense of normalcy, even as the rumor mill churned faster than ever. The more he spoke with the team, the more he realized how much they relied on each other. They were a family, one that had built the hotel's reputation over the years. It wasn't long before Mark received word from the hotel's corporate office. There was going to be a meeting in a few days to officially announce the sale, but they assured him that it would be a smooth transition. They also indicated that some of the current management team would be retained, but many of the lower-level employees might not be as fortunate. Mark couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss at the thought of all the people he had come to know and work with potentially losing their jobs. He had grown close to so many of them, and the thought of them being displaced by a corporate decision felt like a betrayal. Still, he had no control over the situation. All he could do was keep his team motivated and hopeful, and keep the hotel running smoothly for as long as possible. The day of the meeting arrived, and Mark stood at the front of the ballroom, facing the staff. Everyone had gathered for what would be their most important briefing yet. "I know you're all anxious about the future," Mark began, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the situation. "I won't sugarcoat it. Things are changing. The hotel is being sold. I don't know all the details yet, but I want you to know that we're going to handle this together. No matter what comes next, we are a team. We've worked too hard, and we've built something special here. We're going to stick together through this." There were murmurs from the crowd, but Mark's words seemed to settle over them like a bomb. They needed reassurance, and Mark was giving it to them. He wasn't just their manager anymore. He was their leader. He had learned that over the past few months, leadership wasn't just about making decisions. It was about taking care of the people around you, even when the future seemed uncertain. As he finished speaking, he saw nods of understanding and determination. He felt a surge of pride. This was his team, and they were stronger than they knew. The days following the announcement of the hotel's potential sale were a blur of emotions. Mark knew he had done the right thing by rallying his team, offering them reassurance and stability. But as the days wore on, the reality of the situation set in. The uncertainty lingered, and every interaction felt slightly strained. The staff members who had once laughed together over morning coffee now whispered in hushed tones, exchanging rumors and fears. Mark continued to do his best to keep the hotel running smoothly. He spent long hours on the floor, overseeing events, speaking with clients, and coordinating with department heads. The last thing he wanted was for the sale to affect the service the hotel provided. He had made a promise to the staff, and he wasn't about to let them down. But the strain of the situation was starting to take its toll on him. Every smile he offered, every encouraging word he gave, felt more and more like a performance. Beneath it all, he wasn't sure if he believed that things would turn out okay. But he couldn't let that show. Not now. The meeting with corporate was scheduled for the following week. Mark knew that would be the day he learned the full extent of the changes that were coming. Would he be retained as assistant manager? Would the staff he had worked so closely with be kept on? Or would they be replaced by people from the new ownership group? The thought gnawed at him, but he had learned to push it aside. Worrying about what he couldn't control wasn't going to help anyone. On the morning of the meeting, Mark walked into the hotel, more tense than usual. He could feel the weight of his role heavier than ever. The team needed leadership now more than ever, and he had to be the one to provide it. But as he passed through the lobby, his thoughts kept drifting back to the uncertainty about the hotel's future. There was nothing to do but wait. When the time came, Mark gathered with the other department heads in the conference room, waiting for the corporate representatives to arrive. The room was filled with a quiet tension, each person steeling themselves for the inevitable changes to come. He glanced at Rachel, who was sitting beside him. She gave him a small nod, offering some silent reassurance, but Mark could see the unease in her eyes. The door opened, and a pair of corporate representatives walked in. Mark recognized them from previous meetings, but today they looked more serious than usual. The senior rep, a woman named Claire, took a seat at the head of the table and addressed the room. "Thank you for joining us today," Claire began. "We know this has been a difficult time for everyone, and we appreciate your patience as we've worked through the details of the sale. We understand the uncertainty that comes with such a change, but we are confident that these changes will ultimately benefit the hotel and all those who work here." Mark tried to stay calm, but his heart was racing. The moment of truth had arrived. Claire continued, outlining the plans for the hotel's future. The sale would be final within the next month, and the new owners would be a large hospitality group, known for buying up properties and making significant changes to increase profitability. Mark's worst fears seemed to be coming true. There would be layoffs, and some positions would be restructured. The new ownership had already identified key leadership roles that they intended to keep, but there was no guarantee of who would be retained. It was clear that corporate had already made up their minds about the future of the hotel, and those decisions had little to do with the people who had worked there for years. "The good news," Claire said, "is that we value the work you've done here. Some of you will be offered positions with the new ownership group, though we can't make any final decisions until the sale is completed. You'll be informed individually of your status within the next week." Mark felt a knot form in his stomach. He hadn't expected the announcement to be easy, but hearing it confirmed was a different experience entirely. The staff who had worked with him, who had become his second family, were now at risk of losing their jobs. He had to be the one to face them and give them the news. But how could he reassure them when he wasn't even sure of his own future? The meeting ended shortly after, and Mark gathered his things quickly, trying to leave the room before anyone could ask him questions. He knew that in the next few days, he'd need to gather his courage and figure out a way to lead the team through this. He couldn't show fear now, not when they needed him the most. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty. Mark spent the morning in meetings, coordinating with department heads to ensure that operations ran as smoothly as possible. But his mind was elsewhere. He knew that it was only a matter of time before the staff started asking about their futures, about whether they were going to keep their jobs, or if they'd be swept away by the changes. Rachel caught up with him during lunch. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. Mark nodded, though he knew he wasn't fooling anyone. "Yeah, just thinking about what comes next." "I get it. It's tough, but you've done everything you can. No one could have seen this coming. We just have to keep pushing forward, one day at a time," Rachel said, her tone gentle but firm. Mark let out a deep breath. "I don't know if I can keep it together for much longer, Rach. This is all so much. How do I lead when I don't even know what's coming?" Rachel smiled at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "Mark, you've already proven you can handle anything. You're a leader because you care about the team, not because of your title or some corporate plan. You've got this. We all need to focus on what we can control, keeping things moving, keeping morale up. You've done it before. You'll do it again." Her words brought a small sense of comfort to Mark, but he still couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in his chest. That afternoon, he stood in the lobby, observing the hotel staff as they went about their work. His staff. He had worked beside many of them for months now, forming connections and seeing them grow in their roles. He knew them not just as employees, but as people who depended on this place for their livelihoods. And now it felt as though that foundation could crumble at any moment. But he couldn't let it. Not now. His role as leader wasn't just about overseeing the logistics of the hotel. It was about protecting the people who had worked tirelessly to make it what it was. As he walked through the lobby, Mark's resolve strengthened. Whatever happened next, he would face it head-on. He couldn't control the sale of the hotel, but he could control how he led his team through it. He would keep fighting for them, no matter what, because that's what a true leader did. The next few days after the corporate meeting felt like walking through a thick fog. Mark did his best to keep up appearances, continuing his routine of overseeing hotel operations while trying to keep morale high among the staff. He knew that things couldn't stay uncertain for long, and he had to brace himself for what was coming. But one thing was becoming clearer every day. The stress of the situation was starting to affect everyone. One afternoon, as Mark was finishing up a meeting with the catering manager in the ballroom, he received an unexpected text. It was from an unfamiliar number. "Mark, can you meet me in the back office? Need to talk. D." His heart skipped a beat. The D at the end could only mean one person, Dwayne Johnson, the owner of the hotel. The same Dwayne Johnson who had been keeping a low profile since his first meeting with Mark, only occasionally visiting the property for brief check-ins. Mark hadn't spoken to him personally much beyond a few quick conversations in passing, so the idea of meeting him now, at this critical juncture, was unsettling. But he couldn't ignore it. Dwayne had always been a figure of authority, a businessman who knew what he wanted. Still, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was different this time. He made his way to the back office, trying to push aside the anxiety building up in his chest. As he entered, Dwayne was sitting at a desk, looking over some paperwork. When he saw Mark, he smiled, but there was a seriousness to his expression that made Mark pause. "Hey, Mark. Thanks for coming by," Dwayne said, standing up to shake his hand. His grip was firm, but his eyes carried a certain intensity. "Of course. What's going on?" Mark asked, trying to hide the uncertainty in his voice. Dwayne gestured for Mark to take a seat. "I know it's been a rough few weeks with all the corporate stuff going on. You've been handling things well, but I need to make sure we're on the same page. Things are about to get real, and I don't want anyone left in the dark." Mark nodded, settling into the chair across from Dwayne. I've been doing my best to keep the hotel running smoothly. But with all the rumors swirling around, I don't know what the future holds. I'm trying to keep the staff motivated, but it's getting harder every day. Dwayne leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I know. Trust me, I know. But there's more to this situation than meets the eye. Mark furrowed his brow. What do you mean? Dwayne took a deep breath before speaking again. I've been holding off on some things. I wanted to make sure I had all the details before I said anything. The corporate sale, the layoffs, they're all a part of a bigger picture. But the truth is, I'm not sold on it. I haven't been fully convinced that selling this hotel is the right choice. Mark's pulse quickened. Wait, so you're not fully on board with the sale? Dwayne shook his head. No, I'm not. And I've been thinking a lot about it. The sale might make sense on paper, but it doesn't make sense for this hotel. Not the way I see it. Mark was stunned. He had assumed Dwayne was fully behind the sale. He had seen the emails and heard the rumors. But this was a different side of Dwayne, a side that Mark hadn't seen before. So, what does that mean for us? Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Dwayne leaned forward, his gaze intense. It means we've got a chance to make this work. But we need to act fast. I've been in talks with the corporate team, and I'm pushing to stop the sale. I'm not giving up on this place. Not yet. Mark felt a surge of hope he hadn't expected. You're fighting to keep it? Exactly, Dwayne said, nodding. But here's the catch. I need you to step up in a way you haven't before. I need you to help me make a case for keeping the hotel. I need your leadership, your ideas, and your passion for this place. Corporate will only listen if they see we're committed to turning things around. And I believe we can do that. But he couldn't ignore it. Dwayne had always been a figure of authority, a businessman who knew what he wanted. Still, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was different this time. He made his way to the back office, trying to push aside the anxiety building up in his chest. As he entered, Dwayne was sitting at a desk, looking over some paperwork. When he saw Mark, he smiled, but there was a seriousness to his expression that made Mark pause. Hey, Mark. Thanks for coming by, Dwayne said, standing up to shake his hand. His grip was firm, but his eyes carried a certain intensity. Of course. What's going on? Mark asked, trying to hide the uncertainty in his voice. Dwayne gestured for Mark to take a seat. I know it's been a rough few weeks with all the corporate stuff going on. You've been handling things well, but I need to make sure we're on the same page. Things are about to get real, and I don't want anyone left in the dark. Mark nodded, settling into the chair across from Dwayne. I've been doing my best to keep the hotel running smoothly. But with all the rumors swirling around, I don't know what the future holds. I'm trying to keep the staff motivated, but it's getting harder every day. Dwayne leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I know. Trust me, I know. But there's more to this situation than meets the eye. Mark furrowed his brow. What do you mean? Dwayne took a deep breath before speaking again. I've been holding off on some things. I wanted to make sure I had all the details before I said anything. The corporate sale, the layoffs, they're all a part of a bigger picture. But the truth is, I'm not sold on it. I haven't been fully convinced that selling this hotel is the right choice. Mark's pulse quickened. Wait, so you're not fully on board with the sale? Dwayne shook his head. No, I'm not. And I've been thinking a lot about it. The sale might make sense on paper, but it doesn't make sense for this hotel. Not the way I see it. Mark was stunned. He had assumed Dwayne was fully behind the sale. He had seen the emails and heard the rumors. But this was a different side of Dwayne, a side that Mark hadn't seen before. So, what does that mean for us? Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Dwayne leaned forward, his gaze intense. It means we've got a chance to make this work. But we need to act fast. I've been in talks with the corporate team, and I'm pushing to stop the sale. I'm not giving up on this place. Not yet. Mark felt a surge of hope he hadn't expected. You're fighting to keep it? Exactly, Dwayne said, nodding. But here's the catch. I need you to step up in a way you haven't before. I need you to help me make a case for keeping the hotel. I need your leadership, your ideas, and your passion for this place. Corporate will only listen if they see we're committed to turning things around. And I believe we can do that. But he couldn't ignore it. Dwayne had always been a figure of authority, a businessman who knew what he wanted. Still, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was different this time. He made his way to the back office, trying to push aside the anxiety building up in his chest. As he entered, Dwayne was sitting at a desk, looking over some paperwork. When he saw Mark, he smiled, but there was a seriousness to his expression that made Mark pause. "Hey, Mark. Thanks for coming by," Dwayne said, standing up to shake his hand. His grip was firm, but his eyes carried a certain intensity. "Of course. What's going on?" Mark asked, trying to hide the uncertainty in his voice. Dwayne gestured for Mark to take a seat. "I know it's been a rough few weeks with all the corporate stuff going on. You've been handling things well, but I need to make sure we're on the same page. Things are about to get real, and I don't want anyone left in the dark." Mark nodded, settling into the chair across from Dwayne. "I've been doing my best to keep the hotel running smoothly, but with all the rumors swirling around, I don't know what the future holds. I'm trying to keep the staff motivated, but it's getting harder every day." Dwayne leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I know. Trust me, I know. But there's more to this situation than meets the eye." Mark furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" Dwayne took a deep breath before speaking again. "I've been holding off on some things. I wanted to make sure I had all the details before I said anything. The corporate sale, the layoffs, they're all a part of a bigger picture. But the truth is, I'm not sold on it. I haven't been fully convinced that selling this hotel is the right choice." Mark's pulse quickened. "Wait, so you're not fully on board with the sale?" Dwayne shook his head. "No, I'm not. And I've been thinking a lot about it. The sale might make sense on paper, but it doesn't make sense for this hotel. Not the way I see it." Mark was stunned. He had assumed Dwayne was fully behind the sale. He had seen the emails and heard the rumors. But this was a different side of Dwayne, a side that Mark hadn't seen before. "So, what does that mean for us?" Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Dwayne leaned forward, his gaze intense. "It means we've got a chance to make this work. But we need to act fast. I've been in talks with the corporate team, and I'm pushing to stop the sale. I'm not giving up on this place. Not yet." Mark felt a surge of hope he hadn't expected. "You're fighting to keep it?" "Exactly," Dwayne said, nodding. "But here's the catch. I need you to step up in a way you haven't before. I need you to help me make a case for keeping the hotel. I need your leadership, your ideas, and your passion for this place. Corporate will only listen if they see we're committed to turning things around. And I believe we can do that." Mark was silent for a moment, processing everything. This was bigger than anything he had ever faced. Dwayne wasn't just asking for his support. He was asking for him to take on a role that could change everything. He was asking Mark to be a leader in a way he hadn't imagined. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "I won't let you down. I'll do whatever it takes. But what's the plan? How do we convince them?" Dwayne smiled, leaning back in his chair. "I'll tell you everything. But first, let me say this. This hotel is more than just a business to me. I've been in this game long enough to know what works and what doesn't. I want this hotel to thrive, and I think we can make that happen. But we can't do it alone. We need every single person here to believe in it." Mark nodded. "I'm with you. Let's do this." Over the next few days, Mark and Dwayne worked together, formulating a plan. Dwayne had already started speaking to some of the higher-ups in corporate, pushing back against the sale and presenting alternative solutions. Mark was tasked with taking charge of the internal side of things, keeping the staff engaged and motivated, while also gathering ideas for how they could improve operations and make the hotel more profitable. They worked quickly, with a sense of urgency. Mark knew that every day counted, and if they didn't act fast, the sale might go through without them having a chance to make their case. As Mark met with different department heads, his approach began to shift. He wasn't just overseeing operations anymore. He was actively seeking out ways to improve, making it clear that everyone had a role in the hotel's future. From improving guest services to finding new ways to cut costs without sacrificing quality, Mark pushed the team to think outside the box. The staff began to rally around him, their energy shifting from fear to determination. One afternoon, as Mark was walking through the lobby, he noticed a familiar face. Charlie, the head chef, was talking to a new line cook. Charlie spotted Mark and waved him over with a smile. "Mark, got something you should see," Charlie said, leading him to the kitchen. "I think we've got an idea for a new menu that could really boost business. We're talking local ingredients, some fresh dishes that fit the vibe of the hotel. What do you think?" Mark felt a surge of pride. This was it. The staff was starting to take ownership, to believe that they could make a difference. It wasn't just about survival anymore. They were fighting for the hotel's future, and it felt like they were all in it together. "Charlie, that's exactly the kind of initiative we need," Mark said, clapping him on the back. "Let's take it to Dwayne and see if we can make it happen." The sense of unity among the staff was growing stronger every day. They were no longer just employees working in a hotel. They were a team, fighting for something they believed in. Mark and Dwayne's strategy was slowly but surely beginning to take shape. It wasn't going to be easy, but Mark knew that with Dwayne's unexpected support and the dedication of the staff, they had a fighting chance. Mark's plan was gaining momentum, and the hotel's atmosphere had shifted. There was a new energy in the air, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. Staff members who had once whispered in hushed tones about the impending sale were now sharing ideas, offering solutions, and working together to improve the hotel. It was as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders, replaced by something far more powerful: hope. But even with the team rallying behind him, Mark knew that they were far from out of the woods. The battle to save the hotel wasn't going to be won by just a few bright ideas. It would take strategic action, persistence, and, most importantly, Dwayne's unwavering commitment to stand his ground against the corporate forces that wanted to sell. Mark's role had shifted dramatically in just a few days. No longer just a manager trying to hold the pieces together, he had become a key player in a larger game. A game that could determine the future of the hotel and, by extension, the future of the people who worked there. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the next piece of the puzzle fell into place. Mark was reviewing a proposal for a new marketing campaign when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Dwayne. "Can you meet me in the conference room in 30 minutes? I have an update." Mark's heart skipped a beat. It was rare for Dwayne to request a meeting on such short notice, especially after everything they had been working on. Mark stood up, grabbed the proposal, and made his way to the conference room, his mind racing with possibilities. When he entered, Dwayne was already there, pacing in front of a large whiteboard filled with notes and diagrams. The sight of it made Mark pause. Dwayne had clearly been busy. "Mark, thanks for coming," Dwayne said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of urgency. "I just got off a call with the corporate team. They're listening, but we need something big to push this forward. I've been thinking about how to really show them that the hotel can thrive under our leadership." Mark's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Dwayne turned and pointed at the whiteboard. "I've been looking at the numbers. We've got a solid foundation, but we need to show them that we can outperform their expectations. I want to propose a full-scale renovation. Not just cosmetic changes. No, I'm talking about a complete overhaul of our facilities and services. Something that will make this place stand out. Something bold." Mark blinked, trying to process the enormity of what Dwayne was suggesting. A full-scale renovation was no small undertaking. It meant taking a huge risk. The hotel would have to be closed for weeks, if not months. The cost would be astronomical, and the timeline would put them under extreme pressure. But there was something in Dwayne's eyes, a determination that Mark couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a business move. This was about saving the hotel, fighting for something they both believed in. "Are you serious?" Mark asked, his voice almost incredulous. "A complete overhaul? That's a huge risk." Dwayne nodded. "I know, but think about it, Mark. If we can prove to them that we're willing to invest in the future of this place, if we can show them that we have a vision for where we're headed, they won't be able to ignore us. We need to make a statement." Mark stood there for a moment, considering the proposal. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that Dwayne was right. This wasn't just about putting a few new coats of paint on the walls or installing some new furniture. This was about showing the corporate team, and everyone else, that the hotel was worth fighting for. It was about showing that they were capable of more than just surviving. They were capable of thriving. "Okay," Mark said, his voice resolute. "Let's do it. But we're going to need everyone on board for this. We can't do it without the staff." This has to be a team effort. Dwayne smiled, clearly pleased with Mark's response. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. We'll need to bring in some experts, get the financing lined up, and start putting together a plan. But we can't afford to wait. We need to move quickly, or we risk losing everything. Mark's mind was already spinning with ideas. There was so much to consider. Contractors, designers, the logistics of shutting down certain parts of the hotel while others remained operational. But it didn't matter. The hotel was worth the risk, and they had no choice but to go all in. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Mark and Dwayne met with architects, designers, and contractors to discuss the scope of the renovation. They toured the hotel, taking notes on what needed to be updated, what could be reimagined, and what could be repurposed. The vision they had for the hotel was ambitious, sleek, modern, and welcoming, but still holding on to the charm and character that made the hotel unique. Mark also took the time to speak with the staff, making sure everyone knew what was happening and how they could contribute. He wanted them to feel involved in the process, to know that their opinions mattered. This was going to be their hotel, too. We're going to need every single person here to make this happen, Mark said during a staff meeting. This isn't just about a renovation. It's about showing corporate and ourselves that we have what it takes to make this hotel a success. We're all in this together. The staff responded with enthusiasm, eager to be a part of something that could change the hotel's future. Charlie, the head chef, was already brainstorming new menu ideas for the restaurant, while Rachel was working on a rebranding campaign to attract more guests. Everyone was pitching in, from the front desk staff to the housekeeping team. They all believed in what they were doing. But even as the excitement grew, Mark knew that this was just the beginning. The renovation would be a huge undertaking, and it was far from guaranteed that it would work. There would be setbacks, delays, and challenges along the way. And in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that corporate would still be waiting to pull the trigger on the sale. It would be up to him, Dwayne, and the team to prove that they could turn the hotel into something more than just a property on a balance sheet. They had to make it a symbol of resilience and potential. The clock was ticking, and they had no time to waste. The momentum was building. Mark could feel it in every corner of the hotel. The energy was palpable, and for the first time in weeks, people were excited about the future. The renovation plans were in motion, and the staff was committed to making it work. But as much as they had achieved in the past few days, the hardest part was still ahead of them. A full-scale renovation was a massive undertaking. Every aspect of the hotel, from the lobby to the rooms, from the restaurant to the meeting halls, was being reimagined. Mark was overseeing every detail, working tirelessly with designers, contractors, and architects to make sure the vision Dwayne had for the hotel was realized. But the challenge wasn't just in the physical work that had to be done. The real test was going to come when they had to keep operations running during the renovation, manage the budget, and, most importantly, continue convincing the corporate team that they were making progress. Dwayne's battle to stop the sale of the hotel was still ongoing, and while they had made some headway, the corporate executives were still skeptical. Time was running out. Mark sat in his office one afternoon, going over the project timeline with his assistant, Rachel. She had been a huge help in keeping things organized, tracking contractors, and handling the many logistics that came with managing such a huge project. But even she could sense the mounting pressure. "Mark," Rachel said, glancing up from her notes, "we're running out of time. The contractors need to start in the next week if we want to stay on schedule, but there's still a lot of paperwork to handle. And we haven't gotten the green light from corporate yet." Mark ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the situation. "I know. Dwayne's been pushing hard, but we haven't had any solid commitment from them. I think they're still holding back." Rachel nodded. "It's frustrating. We're doing everything we can here, and they're still hesitating." Mark leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if it would give him an answer. He knew that time was slipping away, and the longer the corporate team waited, the more uncertain the hotel's future became. They were in a race against the clock, but Mark wasn't about to give up. He couldn't. "I'm going to speak with Dwayne," Mark said, standing up. "We need to make a stronger case. We can't keep waiting for corporate to make up their minds." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "What's the plan?" Mark smiled faintly. "It's time to show them we're serious. We need to demonstrate that this renovation isn't just a pipe dream. We're going to put our money where our mouth is." Later that afternoon, Mark met with Dwayne in his office. Dwayne had been tied up with meetings, but when Mark entered, he could see the concern etched across his face. "Mark, we need to talk," Dwayne said, standing up as Mark walked in. "The clock's ticking. I just got off the phone with corporate again. They're still dragging their feet. We're running out of time." Mark nodded, feeling the same weight. "I know, but I think it's time to step up the pressure. We can't keep waiting for them to make a decision. If we're going to pull this off, we need to show them the hotel is worth fighting for." Dwayne raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" "We're going to start the renovation," Mark said, his voice steady. "We're going to show them we're serious about this place. We'll begin with the lobby and the restaurant, two areas that are critical to the hotel's image. We'll get the contractors in, and we'll get the ball rolling, even without full corporate approval. If they see us moving forward, they won't have a choice but to back us." Dwayne considered this for a moment, his face unreadable. "It's risky. We're talking about a significant investment. What if corporate still doesn't buy in?" Mark met his gaze. "We can't afford to wait for them to make a decision. The longer we delay, the more we risk losing everything. We need to create momentum, show them that we believe in this project and that we're already committed. If we sit on our hands waiting for them to approve, we'll lose." Dwayne smiled. It was a rare smile, but one that carried a sense of resolve. "You're right. I've been hesitant to push too hard, but maybe it's time we take matters into our own hands. Let's do it. We'll start with the lobby, get the designs approved, and start bringing in the contractors. If corporate sees us moving forward, they'll have to pay attention." Mark nodded, feeling a surge of confidence. This was the gamble they needed to take. It wasn't just about waiting. It was about making a statement. They were showing corporate that they weren't going to sit around while the hotel's future was on the line. The next morning, the contractors arrived at the hotel bright and early, ready to begin the work on the lobby and the restaurant. Mark had arranged for a team of experts to meet with the designers, and the work was soon underway. The staff watched with a mix of excitement and nervousness as construction crews began clearing out old furniture and prepping the areas for the redesign. Charlie, the head chef, was especially excited. He had been pushing for a revamped kitchen and dining area for months, and now it looked like his vision was finally coming to life. "This place is going to be incredible," Charlie said to Mark as they walked through the restaurant, inspecting the work. "The new layout, the open kitchen, I can already picture it." Mark smiled, feeling a rush of pride. "I'm glad you're on board, Charlie. This is just the beginning. We've got a lot more to do." As the days passed, the renovation moved forward at a rapid pace. The lobby was transformed into a sleek, modern space that reflected the hotel's upscale vibe, with new furniture, polished marble floors, and fresh coats of paint. The restaurant was next, with a complete overhaul of the layout and the introduction of a new menu that would feature local ingredients and innovative dishes. But even as progress was made on the ground, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that corporate was still watching from the sidelines, waiting for an excuse to pull the plug. The stakes were higher than ever, and the team knew that they couldn't stop now. 1 week into the renovation, Mark received an email from the corporate team. His heart skipped a beat as he clicked open the message. It was from the CEO himself. "Mark, we've been following the progress of the renovations, and we're impressed by the direction things are going. However, as you know, there are still many variables to consider. I'd like to schedule a meeting next week to discuss the future of the hotel and the ongoing renovation project. We'll need to make some key decisions soon." Mark sat back, exhaling slowly. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The corporate team was finally acknowledging the renovations, but there was still no guarantee they would approve the continued investment. The meeting next week would be make or break. Mark forwarded the email to Dwayne with a single line, "It's time to make our case." The day had arrived. Mark stood in front of the hotel's sleek new lobby, his gaze fixed on the massive glass doors that now served as the entrance to what was once a tired and outdated space. The contractors had worked tirelessly over the last few weeks, and the results were breathtaking. The fresh coat of paint, the polished marble floors, the statement chandelier hanging above the reception desk. Everything was perfect. The hotel felt renewed. But that wasn't the reason Mark was standing there. No, the true reason for his nervous energy was the meeting that was just hours away. A meeting with the corporate team, one that would determine the future of the hotel and whether the renovations they had initiated would be enough to convince the higher-ups to back them. Mark's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Dwayne. "We're ready. Meet me in the conference room in 30. Mark took a deep breath and nodded to himself. It was time to make their case. As he walked toward the conference room, his mind raced. The hotel had made tremendous strides in a short period of time, but would the corporate team see it? Would they see the risk, the vision, the potential? Or would they dismiss it all as just another empty promise? The conference room was spacious, with a large oval table in the center. Dwayne was already there, sitting at one end, reviewing some documents. Mark took his seat next to him, trying to steady his nerves. "Ready for this?" Dwayne asked, his eyes scanning the paperwork in front of him. His calm demeanor was the exact opposite of Mark's churning stomach. "I guess we don't have much choice now," Mark replied with a dry laugh. "We've already started, and the renovations are moving forward. There's no going back." Dwayne nodded, a knowing smile creeping onto his face. "Exactly. We're in this together." The door opened, and the corporate team filed in, led by the CEO himself, Richard Thornton. Mark had met him a few times in passing, but this was the first time they would have a one-on-one conversation about the hotel's future. Thornton was a tall, imposing figure, his sharp suit only reinforcing his no-nonsense approach to business. He took his seat at the head of the table, followed by a few of the hotel's other senior executives, including Sarah, the chief financial officer, and Derek, the director of operations. "Mark, Dwayne," Thornton began, his voice low and deliberate. "Let's get straight to the point. We've been monitoring the progress of the renovations. Frankly, we weren't sure if you'd be able to pull it off, but I'm hearing good things. Tell us what you've done and why we should believe this will work." Mark exchanged a glance with Dwayne, then leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "We've made significant changes already. The lobby's been completely revamped, the restaurant's redesign is nearly finished, and we've begun working on key areas that will set us apart from the competition. The feedback we've gotten from staff and guests has been overwhelmingly positive. They can see the change, feel the difference." Thornton's eyes narrowed slightly as he listened, but he didn't interrupt. "We're not just throwing money at this project," Mark continued, gaining confidence. "We've made sure the renovations are in line with a larger vision. We're building a brand, not just a hotel. Our goal is to attract a higher-end clientele while maintaining the charm and warmth that makes this place unique." Dwayne joined in, his voice steady. "We've done the math, and we believe these changes will lead to a significant increase in revenue. The renovations will improve guest satisfaction, which will, in turn, increase occupancy rates and room rates. The hotel will be positioned as a top-tier destination." Sarah, the CFO, chimed in, her tone skeptical. "I see the potential, but let's talk numbers. How much have you spent so far? And what's the projected ROI on these changes?" Mark exchanged another glance with Dwayne before replying. "We've spent approximately $1.5 million so far on the lobby and restaurant renovations, with another $500,000 allocated for additional work. The projected ROI, based on our market research and revenue projections, is about 25% within the first year of completing the renovations. We've also got plans to increase our marketing efforts, attract new business, and tap into niche markets like corporate events and high-end tourists." The room was silent for a moment as the corporate team processed the numbers. Mark could feel the tension in the air, but he pushed forward. "Look," he said, his voice firm but calm. "We're not just asking for your approval. We're showing you that we're already committed to this hotel's success. We've taken risks, and we're ready to do whatever it takes to make this work. But we need your support to continue the renovations, to expand on the changes we've started. If we don't act now, we risk falling behind, and the hotel will become just another asset to sell off." Thornton leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he considered Mark's words. The silence was thick, almost unbearable. After what felt like an eternity, Thornton finally spoke. "You've made a strong case, Mark. Dwayne, I'll admit, I was skeptical at first, but I'm seeing the potential now. However, I'm still not convinced it's enough to stop the sale of the hotel. We're looking at a lot of money here, and corporate has its own interests to consider. Mark's heart sank. It wasn't over yet. There was still doubt in Thornton's voice. Dwayne, sensing the shift in the conversation, leaned forward, his tone more assertive. Richard, I understand your concerns, but let me remind you, we've done the work. We're not just talking about a few cosmetic changes here. This is a full-scale transformation. And this hotel isn't just a property. It's a brand, a legacy. We've already started to turn things around, but we need your backing to see it through. Thornton looked at Dwayne for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Mark held his breath, hoping beyond hope that they had done enough. Finally, Thornton nodded. All right, I'll give you the go-ahead. You'll get the funding to continue with the renovations, and we'll give you the time you need to prove this can work. But we'll be watching closely. If the numbers don't add up, if the guests aren't coming in, we'll reassess. Understand? Mark exhaled, his entire body relaxing for the first time in what felt like hours. Understood. You won't regret this, Richard. Thornton stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I hope not. Good luck. As the corporate team filed out, Dwayne turned to Mark with a grin. We did it. We've got the green light. Mark's relief was palpable, but he couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility now on his shoulders. The renovation was far from finished, and the hotel's future was still uncertain. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope that things might just work out. The green light had been given, and the pressure was on. The corporate team had granted Mark and Dwayne the funding they needed to continue with the renovations, but there was still a lingering feeling in the air, a sense that nothing was certain. The hotel was still in a fragile state, and it would take everything they had to push it toward success. With the corporate meeting behind them, Mark felt a renewed sense of urgency. It wasn't just about completing the renovations anymore. It was about making sure everything came together perfectly. This wasn't just about fresh paint and new furniture. This was about the future of the hotel, and by extension, the future of everyone who worked there. Dwayne was no less determined. He had a way of making people believe in a dream, a vision. And now that the corporate team had given their approval, he was ready to pour every ounce of energy into ensuring that vision became a reality. The hotel's staff had been working harder than ever, and morale had surged since the meeting. Everyone was invested in the success of the renovations, and now, the pressure to deliver was higher than ever. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Mark's days were filled with back-to-back meetings, contractor reviews, and strategy sessions. Every detail had to be considered: the furniture, the flooring, the lighting, the layout, the branding. Nothing could be left to chance. The renovations were moving forward at full speed, but there was a growing sense that something was missing, a spark, an element that would make the hotel stand out in the highly competitive market. Mark knew exactly what it was. It was the experience. He called Dwayne that afternoon. I've been thinking, Mark said when Dwayne answered. We've got the space, we've got the design, but we need something more, a signature experience. Something that makes this hotel unforgettable. Dwayne was quiet for a moment before responding. You're right. We need to do something bold, something that sets us apart. Any ideas? Mark smiled. I've been talking to the marketing team. What if we focus on wellness? We could create a luxury wellness retreat experience, something for people who want to escape, recharge, and reconnect. A spa, health-conscious dining, yoga, meditation, maybe even personal training. Dwayne's voice lit up. I love it. We could make the hotel not just a place to stay, but a destination for people who want to escape the chaos of their lives. And it ties into the idea of exclusivity. It's different. It's memorable. Mark could hear the excitement building. Exactly. And we already have the perfect space for it. The area around the pool could be transformed into a wellness lounge with an outdoor yoga deck. We can offer personalized spa treatments, exclusive packages for corporate retreats, and curated health menus at the restaurant. We can even partner with local fitness experts to provide training. Dwayne was already thinking ahead. Let's do it. I'll talk to the team, and we'll get started on the logistics. We can't afford to waste time. We need this to be in place by the time the hotel reopens. In the following weeks, Mark and Dwayne set the wheels in motion. The wellness retreat concept was brought to life with a full-fledged spa design, complete with treatment rooms, an outdoor relaxation area, and a focus on organic, locally sourced products. The restaurant's menu was reworked to offer fresh, healthy options, emphasizing seasonal ingredients and nutrient-dense meals. The hotel's marketing team quickly took hold of the idea, creating a series of campaigns to advertise the luxury wellness retreat. They used social media, email marketing, and influencer partnerships to target the right audience: affluent professionals, health-conscious individuals, and anyone looking for a peaceful escape from the grind of daily life. But as the wellness concept began to take shape, there was another challenge Mark hadn't anticipated: competition. Word had started to spread, and other hotels in the area began offering similar experiences. It was clear that they weren't the only ones who had seen the potential in a wellness-driven brand. Mark knew that if they were going to make their mark, they had to do something even more unique, something that set them apart from the newcomers. One afternoon, Mark sat in the new wellness lounge, sipping a green juice as he watched the construction crews work on the last details of the space. It had come together beautifully, serene, peaceful, and inviting. But the pressure was mounting. Corporate was watching closely, and they were still hesitant. They needed to see results, and fast. Dwayne joined him a few moments later, his brow furrowed as he approached. "I've been hearing rumors about some of the other hotels in the area offering similar packages. They're starting to catch up to us." Mark took a deep breath. "I know. I've been hearing the same thing. But we can't let that shake us. We've got something they don't have." Dwayne raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "The experience." Mark smiled. "We don't just want people to stay here. We want them to remember it. We want them to leave feeling like they've been transformed. We need to create experiences that stick with people long after they've checked out." Dwayne's eyes lit up. "You're right. It's about more than just the wellness aspect. It's the environment, the services, the little things that make the stay memorable. We can offer personalized experiences that no one else has. Maybe guided hikes, a private chef's dinner in the suite, or even a curated workout program tailored to each guest's needs." Mark nodded, feeling a spark of inspiration. "Exactly. We need to make sure that when people leave, they're not just talking about the spa or the yoga class. They're talking about the entire experience. That's the edge we need." With renewed focus, Mark and Dwayne pushed forward. The wellness offerings were expanded with a series of bespoke packages, including private wellness consultations, guided hikes in the nearby mountains, and custom spa treatments tailored to each guest. They even developed a luxury reboot package, an all-inclusive experience that combined fitness, nutrition, relaxation, and wellness into a 3-day retreat. The marketing team went into overdrive, targeting local influencers who were known for their health-conscious lifestyles. They arranged collaborations with fitness experts and wellness bloggers to generate buzz. The hotel's social media pages were flooded with beautiful images of the wellness experience: yoga at sunrise, fresh smoothie bowls, serene spa moments. It was the perfect picture of luxury, relaxation, and rejuvenation. As the grand reopening approached, Mark felt a renewed sense of hope. The renovations were complete, the wellness concept was in place, and the team was ready to showcase the hotel to the world. But he knew the battle wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The real challenge lay in delivering on the promises they had made, to the guests, to corporate, and to themselves. The days leading up to the grand reopening were a whirlwind of final touches, last-minute meetings, and endless decisions. Mark hardly had time to breathe, let alone think. The entire hotel was buzzing with energy. New staff had been hired, the wellness retreat packages were finalized, and the marketing campaigns were running at full throttle. They had put everything into this moment, and now it was time to see if it would pay off. On the morning of the grand reopening, Mark stood in front of the hotel, taking in the view. The facade was pristine, gleaming in the sunlight, a reflection of the transformation that had taken place inside. The new signage above the entrance was bold and modern, the kind of design that made a statement. The lobby inside was bustling with activity as the team prepared for the first guests to arrive. It was a mixture of excitement and tension, a feeling of anticipation that hung in the air. Dwayne walked up beside him, hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the scene. "It's happening," he said, his voice filled with a mix of pride and nerves. Mark nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "We've done everything we can. Now we wait." As the morning turned to afternoon, the first wave of guests began to arrive. They were greeted by the staff with warm smiles and a sense of purpose. The transformation of the hotel had been impressive, and the excitement in the air was palpable. People marveled at the new wellness lounge, the calming spa area, and the serene atmosphere that had replaced the old, tired vibe of the hotel. For Mark, every interaction with the guests was a reminder of why they had done this: to create an experience, a place where people could escape the demands of their busy lives and find peace. It was all about offering more than just a room to sleep in. It was about offering a sanctuary. The first few days went by in a blur. The hotel was busy, the wellness packages were being snapped up, and guests seemed genuinely impressed by the changes. Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him. The hard work, the risks, the sleepless nights, they were paying off. But there were still challenges to face. As the honeymoon phase wore off, the hotel had to prove that it could deliver on its promises. It was one thing to have a beautiful space, but it was another to provide an exceptional experience from start to finish. Every detail mattered: the level of service, the food quality, the fitness classes, the spa treatments, the atmosphere. It all had to come together seamlessly. Mark spent every day on the floor, walking through the hotel, checking in with the guests, listening to their feedback. He saw the smiles, the gratitude, but also the small complaints, things that needed to be ironed out. A slight delay in the spa appointments, a minor issue with room service. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to keep him on his toes. One evening, as Mark walked through the wellness lounge, he overheard a conversation between two guests. They were talking about how much they enjoyed their morning yoga session and how the staff had been so attentive. Mark's heart lifted as he listened to their words. They were experiencing exactly what he had envisioned. But he also knew they weren't there yet. There was still so much more to do, and it wasn't going to be easy. On the fourth day after the reopening, Mark and Dwayne had a meeting scheduled with the corporate team. It was a follow-up to see how the renovations were progressing and to report on the initial guest feedback. Mark couldn't deny that the pressure was mounting. This meeting would determine whether the corporate team would continue to support them or pull back, especially considering the costs involved in the renovations. The meeting took place in one of the hotel's new conference rooms, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city skyline. As Mark and Dwayne walked in, they were met with the familiar faces of Richard Thornton and his team. "Good to see you both," Thornton said, offering a handshake. "I'll admit, I was skeptical, but I've heard some positive things about the hotel's reopening." Mark nodded, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. "It's been a good start. We've had some great feedback, especially from guests who have tried the wellness retreat packages. We've been getting a lot of inquiries for the upcoming months." "That's good to hear," Thornton said, his expression unreadable. "But the numbers need to back that up. What are we looking at in terms of occupancy and revenue?" Dwayne jumped in. "We've seen a steady increase in bookings, particularly in our premium wellness packages. We've already seen a 20% increase in room rates, and occupancy has exceeded our projections by 10% for the first week. The spa has been booked solid, and our wellness offerings are a hit. We're also seeing repeat customers, which is a great sign." Thornton raised an eyebrow. "That's promising. But what about long-term growth? We need to see sustainability. One good week doesn't mean much unless it continues." Mark felt the weight of the conversation settle on him. "We're already seeing positive trends, but we know we're not out of the woods yet. The next few months are critical. We've implemented strategies to keep momentum going, like seasonal packages, exclusive events, and partnerships with local fitness influencers. We're also exploring corporate retreats, which should help fill the rooms during the off-peak season." Thornton remained silent for a moment, processing the information. Mark and Dwayne exchanged a brief glance before Thornton finally spoke again. "All right," he said slowly. "You've made your case. We'll give you the next quarter to prove that this can continue. But let me be clear. You need to maintain these results. If you can't sustain growth, the hotel will be considered for sale again. Understand?" Mark's heart raced, but he nodded. "Understood." Dwayne, ever the optimist, added, "We won't let you down, Richard." As the meeting concluded, Mark couldn't shake the weight of Thornton's words. While the initial reopening had been a success, there was still so much to prove. They had to maintain the momentum, keep up the guest experience, and most importantly, keep the numbers up. This was their chance. Not just to save the hotel, but to create something lasting, something people would talk about for years to come. But for now, Mark couldn't help but allow himself a brief moment of celebration. They had taken a huge step forward, and despite the hurdles ahead, it was clear that the hotel was on its way to becoming something truly special. As he stepped out of the conference room and into the hotel lobby, he looked around at the hustle and bustle. The hotel was alive, and for the first time in a long while, Mark allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had turned a corner. The initial excitement of the hotel reopening began to settle into a steady rhythm, and Mark felt like he could finally catch his breath. But as is often the case in business, things weren't quite as smooth as they seemed on the surface. One morning, just a week after the corporate meeting, Mark received a call that would turn everything upside down. It was from the hotel's head of operations, Samantha. "Mark, we've got a serious problem," Samantha's voice crackled through the phone. "I think you need to come down here, right now." Mark's stomach tightened. "What's going on?" "We've had a major issue with the plumbing in the spa area," Samantha explained, her voice tinged with anxiety. "Water damage has spread throughout the treatment rooms. We're going to need to shut down the entire spa area for a few days for repairs." Mark's heart sank. This was exactly the kind of problem they couldn't afford, especially not after the grand reopening. The spa had been one of the hotel's biggest selling points, and the wellness packages were already proving to be a huge draw for guests. A shutdown, even temporary, could cause serious damage to their reputation. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. When Mark arrived at the hotel, Samantha was waiting for him in the hallway outside the spa. She looked as if she had been running on fumes all morning, her hair slightly disheveled and her eyes tired. "Let me show you," she said, leading him inside. The spa was a disaster. The once serene and calming space now smelled of damp wood and mildew. Water had leaked from one of the pipes above the treatment rooms, and it had spread quickly, soaking the floors and seeping into the walls. The soft, calming ambience that had taken weeks to perfect was now replaced with the harsh sounds of dehumidifiers and fans running at full blast. "This is bad," Mark muttered, walking further into the space and inspecting the damage. "How long will it take to fix?" "We've already called in the specialists," Samantha replied. "They're saying it could take at least 4 or 5 days to get everything back to normal. But that's assuming no further damage is found once the repairs start." Mark cursed under his breath. This was exactly the kind of setback that could break their momentum. "Do we have to shut the entire spa down? What about the other areas?" Samantha shook her head. "We can keep the main lobby and wellness lounge areas open, but the treatment rooms, the sauna, and everything behind the scenes will be off limits until further notice." Mark knew they had no choice but to follow the expert's advice. But that didn't make it any easier. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as the hotel was getting into a rhythm, this unexpected challenge threatened to derail everything. As Mark walked through the lobby later that afternoon, he was approached by a guest, a middle-aged woman who looked a little flustered. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice tight. "I've been really looking forward to my spa day tomorrow, and I just heard that it's been shut down. Is that true?" Mark nodded, forcing a smile. "Unfortunately, yes. We had a plumbing issue, and we're doing everything we can to fix it. We're hoping to have everything up and running in a few days." The woman's face fell. "I booked the wellness package for a weekend getaway. The spa was the main reason I chose this hotel. What am I supposed to do now?" Mark felt a pang of guilt. He knew that losing the spa would be a huge disappointment to guests who had made it the focal point of their stay. "I completely understand your frustration. We're offering full refunds for any spa services that are affected, and we can also offer you a complimentary upgrade to one of our luxury suites for the inconvenience. We want to make sure your stay is still memorable." The woman paused, clearly weighing her options. After a few moments, she nodded. "I'll take the upgrade, but I really hope you get the spa fixed quickly. I was really looking forward to it." Mark promised her that they would do everything in their power to resolve the issue and walked away, his mind racing with solutions. The next few days were a blur of logistics. Mark spent most of his time on the phone with contractors, overseeing repairs, and meeting with the marketing team to figure out how they would handle the situation. Samantha was working around the clock, coordinating with the guests to reschedule appointments and offering alternative services, like complimentary access to the nearby fitness center. Despite everyone's best efforts, it was clear that the spa closure was causing a ripple effect. Several more guests voiced their concerns, and though the staff worked tirelessly to make adjustments, it wasn't enough to avoid the occasional negative review. The hotel's online reputation, which had been pristine just days before, started to take a hit. One evening, as Mark was going over reports, he got a text from Dwayne. "We need to talk. Meeting in 30 minutes?" Mark didn't need to ask what it was about. The spa situation was clearly taking a toll, and Dwayne had been feeling the pressure as much as he had. They met in Dwayne's office shortly afterward. "You're not going to like this," Dwayne began, leaning back in his chair, his face pinched with concern. "We've got another issue. I just had a conversation with Richard Thornton." Mark braced himself. "And?" "They're concerned. We've had a few complaints about the spa, and with the delays, they're questioning whether we can handle the pressure. They want to see results, and fast. They've set a deadline. If the spa isn't operational in the next few days, they're considering pulling back on further investments." Mark felt the weight of Dwayne's words. The corporate team was already looking for reasons to pull support. They hadn't even given them a full chance to resolve the issue before pushing the panic button. "We can fix this," Mark said, his voice more determined than ever. "We're going to get the spa back online, and we'll offer the best customer service we can in the meantime." "We're not backing down." Dwayne nodded, but the tension in his eyes told Mark that they were in for a long fight. "We can't afford any more mistakes, Mark. We need to deliver." The next few days were a marathon. The plumbing issues were resolved sooner than expected, and the contractors worked overtime to get the spa back to its pristine state. Mark and Samantha personally oversaw every detail, making sure nothing was overlooked. When the spa finally reopened, Mark felt like he could breathe again. Guests were back to enjoying their treatments, and the positive feedback started to flood in once more. But the pressure wasn't over. They had narrowly avoided disaster, but they had learned a valuable lesson about the fragility of their situation. The spa was not just a luxury, it was a lifeline. It had been a week since the spa reopened, and the hotel was slowly returning to normal. The guests were happy again, the reviews were improving, and the corporate team had reluctantly eased up on their scrutiny. But Mark knew better than to think the battle was over. The hotel's fragile balance between success and failure was becoming increasingly evident, and every day felt like a delicate dance. The pressure was relentless. Corporate investors, local competitors, and even the hotel's own staff all had high expectations. Everyone seemed to want something, and it was all riding on the next few months. One misstep, and everything could come crashing down. Mark had just finished a meeting with the marketing team when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Dwayne. "We need to talk. Meet me in 15 minutes." Mark felt his pulse quicken. He had a pretty good idea of what was coming. With everything going smoothly for the moment, Dwayne likely had some bad news to share. Mark didn't waste any time. He grabbed his jacket and headed to Dwayne's office. When Mark entered, Dwayne was already sitting at his desk, his eyes glued to his computer screen. He didn't look up when Mark walked in, and the silence hung in the air for a few long seconds before Dwayne finally spoke. "I just got off the phone with Richard Thornton," Dwayne began, his tone more serious than usual. Mark's stomach dropped. "What's the issue?" "They're not happy with the current guest traffic. The numbers are okay, but they're not where they expected them to be. They want to see more high-end clientele booking the wellness retreats and more premium packages moving forward," Dwayne said, his voice tense. "And I'm hearing rumors that they're looking at other properties in the area. If we don't meet their expectations, we could lose everything we've worked for." Mark leaned against the wall, trying to process the news. "How much time do we have?" "A few weeks at most," Dwayne replied. "Richard wants to see significant progress by then. Otherwise, they'll start talking about selling the property or cutting back on funding. We've already been lucky once with the spa shutdown, but we can't afford any more setbacks." Mark's mind raced. The weight of the situation was suffocating. He had no choice but to rise to the challenge, but the stakes had never been higher. They had to deliver, or everything they had worked for would come crashing down. "All right," Mark said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Let's focus on what we can control. We need to bring in more high-end clients, and we need to market the hell out of the wellness retreats. We'll improve our partnerships with luxury brands, and we'll make sure the spa is fully booked and running smoothly every day. Dwayne nodded, but his expression remained grim. That's the plan, but it's going to be tough. We're going up against some of the best hotels in the area, and if we don't hit the right targets, we risk everything. The next few days were a blur of strategic meetings, marketing plans, and constant adjustments. Mark and his team worked tirelessly to brainstorm new ways to attract a wealthier clientele, tweaking their advertising campaigns, reaching out to influencers in the luxury lifestyle space, and refining their wellness packages. They even started offering exclusive VIP experiences for high-profile clients, with private wellness consultations, personalized fitness plans, and five-star dining experiences. But despite the hustle, Mark couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was still missing. Even as the hotel began to attract more high-end guests, he knew it wasn't enough to appease the corporate team. They needed something more, something that would elevate the hotel above its competitors and create a buzz that couldn't be ignored. One evening, as Mark was walking through the hotel, he was stopped by a guest in the lobby. The woman was impeccably dressed, her demeanor calm and graceful. She had an air of sophistication about her that immediately set her apart from the average guest. She approached Mark with a friendly smile. "Excuse me, are you the manager here?" she asked. Mark gave her a polite nod. "Yes, I'm Mark. How can I help you?" "I just wanted to say how much I've enjoyed my stay here," she said, her voice warm. The spa was absolutely divine, and the wellness lounge is such a peaceful retreat. I've stayed at several luxury hotels around the world, but I have to say, this place has something special. Mark smiled, grateful for the compliment. "Thank you. We've worked really hard to make this a unique experience for our guests." "I can tell," she said, her eyes lighting up. "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. I'm an influencer in the wellness space, and I think your hotel would be the perfect partner for some of my upcoming projects. I could help spread the word about your wellness retreats to my millions of followers." Mark's heart skipped a beat. This was the kind of opportunity he had been hoping for. If they could get the right influencers on board, it could elevate the hotel's reputation to new heights. But there was a catch. "That sounds amazing," Mark said, trying to remain composed. "What exactly did you have in mind?" The woman smiled, her tone becoming more businesslike. "I'm planning a wellness retreat for a select group of my followers. We'll do everything: private yoga sessions, personalized spa treatments, and high-end nutrition consultations. If your hotel is interested in hosting it, I'd be happy to offer my support and share the experience with my audience." Mark considered it for a moment. The retreat could be the kind of high-profile event that would help the hotel stand out from the competition, but he also knew it would be a significant investment. "I think we'd be very interested," Mark said, his voice firm. "Let's set up a meeting to discuss the details." The meeting with the influencer went smoothly, and within a matter of days, Mark had secured the partnership. The wellness retreat would be held at the hotel in just 2 weeks, and it promised to be an exclusive event with top-tier influencers, celebrities, and high-net-worth individuals in attendance. The exposure would be immense, and if it went well, it could put the hotel on the map as a premier wellness destination. But the pressure was mounting. Mark could feel the weight of the expectations on his shoulders more than ever. They needed this event to be a success. There could be no mistakes, no setbacks. Everything had to go according to plan. As Mark sat in his office late one night, reviewing the final preparations for the retreat, he received an unexpected phone call from Dwayne. "Mark, you need to hear this," Dwayne said urgently. "I just got word that Richard Thornton is coming to town next week. He wants to see the results for himself." Mark's pulse quickened. The corporate team's eyes were on them once again. The success of the retreat and everything else they had planned had just become even more crucial. "We'll make it happen," Mark said, trying to steady his breath. "This is our moment, Dwayne. We can't let it slip away." Dwayne's voice was filled with determination. "We won't. Let's do this." The day of the exclusive wellness retreat had arrived. Mark felt a mix of excitement and anxiety as he paced around the hotel. This was the moment they had been working toward for weeks, and it had to be perfect. The influencers, celebrities, and VIP guests were expected to arrive shortly, and every detail had to be flawless. Mark stood in the grand lobby, making last-minute checks with the staff, making sure everything was in place. The hotel had been buzzing with preparation all week. The wellness lounge had been transformed into a serene oasis with soft lighting, aromatic scents filling the air, and every possible luxury service ready for the guests. Mark had personally approved each step, but now it was all out of his hands. "Mark, everything's set up and ready to go," Samantha said, walking over with a clipboard in her hand. "The spa treatments are scheduled, the yoga instructors are in position, and we've got a dedicated team for the private dining experience. The first group should be here in about 30 minutes. Mark nodded, trying to calm his nerves. "Good. Let's make sure we stay ahead of the game. No mistakes today. This could make or break us." Samantha gave him a reassuring smile. "We've got this. We've worked too hard for this not to succeed." As the first guests began to arrive, Mark stood at the entrance, greeting them as they stepped into the lobby. A hush fell over the room as influencers and high-profile clients entered, each of them dressed in high-end athleisure, exuding an air of effortless luxury. Mark recognized several faces, including a famous fitness guru and a well-known lifestyle influencer with millions of followers. He knew that the success of this retreat was crucial not only for their reputation but also for the hotel's future. One of the first guests to approach him was the influencer who had originally brought the idea of the wellness retreat to the hotel. She was as glamorous as ever, her smile dazzling. "Mark, it's so wonderful to finally meet in person," she said, offering a warm handshake. "I'm so excited about this weekend. Everything looks just like I imagined." "I'm glad you're happy," Mark replied, trying to stay composed. "We've put a lot of effort into making sure everything is perfect." "Well, I can already tell," she said, glancing around at the luxurious surroundings. "You've really created something special here." Mark's chest swelled with pride, but he couldn't afford to relax. This was only the beginning. The day went by in a whirlwind of activities. Yoga classes, personalized spa treatments, meditation sessions, and private fitness consultations. Everything went off without a hitch. Guests were indulged in exclusive experiences, and Mark could see the positive feedback coming in real time on social media. The influencers were posting pictures, tagging the hotel, and raving about the luxurious atmosphere. But despite the success, Mark's mind remained fixated on the bigger picture. Richard Thornton was expected to arrive the following morning, and his presence weighed heavily on Mark's thoughts. The corporate team had made it clear. The future of the hotel rested on how well this event performed. If the retreat was a success, it could secure the hotel's reputation as a luxury destination and attract the kind of clientele they needed to thrive. If it failed, it would be a devastating blow. The evening before Richard's arrival, Mark received a call from Dwayne. "Mark, I'm hearing great things from the team," Dwayne said, his voice upbeat. "The guests are loving the retreat. The influencers are already talking about it. But listen, I need you to be ready. Richard's visit is tomorrow, and he's not just here to enjoy the retreat. He's here to evaluate everything." Mark's pulse quickened. "I know. I'm ready." Dwayne's voice turned serious. "Remember, we've done all we can. This event has to be a showcase of everything the hotel is capable of. There can be no surprises tomorrow." The next morning, Mark woke up early, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on him. He had a few hours before Richard's scheduled arrival, but there was no time to waste. He needed to make sure everything was running smoothly. As he walked through the hotel, he saw the retreat in full swing. Guests were engaged in group activities, chatting and laughing as they moved between sessions. The energy was high, and the atmosphere was just what Mark had envisioned. The hotel had never felt more alive. He passed by the spa, where a guest was receiving a facial treatment. The sight of the serene environment reminded him just how far they had come since the plumbing disaster that had threatened to derail everything. But despite the success, the thought of Richard's impending arrival gnawed at him. He knew that while the guests were enjoying themselves, there was still one critical moment left. Richard would be making his rounds, inspecting everything with a critical eye. When Richard Thornton finally arrived, Mark was waiting for him in the lobby. Richard, a tall man in his late 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor, walked into the hotel with the confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. His sharp eyes took in the surroundings as he greeted Mark with a firm handshake. Mark, Richard said, nodding in approval. I've heard a lot of good things about this place. Let's take a look. Mark led Richard on a tour of the hotel, showing him the retreat in full swing. As they passed through the wellness lounge, the yoga studio, and the spa, Richard asked questions, made notes, and gave little feedback, which only made Mark more nervous. The influencers were all busy taking photos, documenting every moment, and posting to their millions of followers. Mark could see the impact it was already having online. But even so, Richard's silence made him feel like every step they took was under a microscope. Finally, they arrived at the outdoor garden area, where the private dinner for the guests was about to begin. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the elegant setup. Guests were gathered, and Mark could tell that everyone was impressed. Richard paused, his eyes scanning the space. "This is quite something," he remarked, nodding slowly. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Had he finally won Richard over? "This is exactly the kind of luxury experience I was hoping for," Richard continued, turning to Mark. "And I've seen enough to know that your team has the capability to deliver." "I'm impressed." Mark exhaled, relief flooding through him. "Thank you, Richard. We've worked really hard to make this experience as special as possible." Richard gave him a small smile. "Well, you've certainly done that. I'll be speaking with the board soon, but I think you've made a solid case. Keep up the good work, Mark." As Richard left, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. The retreat had been a success, and it looked like their efforts had paid off. The high-profile guests were happy, the influencers were already raving about the hotel, and Richard's approval felt like a green light for the future. But even with this victory, Mark knew there was still a long road ahead. They had proven they could rise to the challenge, but the real test would come in the coming months as they had to maintain momentum and deliver on their promises. As the evening ended, Mark took a moment to look around at the beautiful hotel and the guests enjoying themselves. The weight on his shoulders hadn't disappeared, but for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself a moment of peace. He had done it. They had done it. The morning after the wellness retreat ended, Mark walked into the hotel lobby with a sense of accomplishment. He had been running on adrenaline for days, but now that the event was over and Richard Thornton's visit had gone well, a small wave of relief washed over him. For the first time in a while, he felt like the hotel had a solid future ahead of it. Samantha was waiting for him at the front desk, a smile on her face as she approached. "Mark, I have some good news," she said, her eyes sparkling. Mark raised an eyebrow. "What's the news?" "We got the report from Richard's visit," she said, holding up a folder. "And it's exactly what we hoped for. He's giving us the green light." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "Really? That's incredible." Samantha nodded. "It's official. The board is backing the hotel, and we're getting additional funding for the next phase of development. It's all on us now to keep the momentum going, but they're on board." A flood of relief washed over Mark, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of excitement. The hard work had paid off, and now, with the green light from the board, the possibilities seemed endless. "Fantastic," Mark said, feeling a wave of gratitude. "We've got a lot of work ahead, but this is the breakthrough we've been waiting for." Over the next few weeks, Mark and his team focused on building on the success of the wellness retreat. The hotel's reputation was growing, and they were attracting more high-profile guests. The corporate team had finally recognized the hotel as a serious player in the luxury market. Mark knew this was just the beginning. He couldn't afford to rest on their laurels. There was still so much to do to solidify their place as a premier destination. He started strategizing with the team about expanding their offerings, more exclusive events, high-end partnerships with luxury brands, and a broader marketing campaign aimed at a more affluent clientele. He also knew they needed to strengthen their relationships with the influencers who had helped elevate the hotel's image. One morning, as Mark sat at his desk reviewing potential partnerships, he received an unexpected email from Dwayne. It was brief but to the point. "We're meeting with the board next week. They want to discuss the next steps. They're impressed with the retreat, but they want more. Let's make sure we're prepared." Mark leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. The pressure was mounting again. The initial approval was just the start, and now they needed to deliver more than ever. But this time, Mark felt more prepared. They had proven themselves once. They could do it again. A few days later, Mark attended the meeting with the board, along with Dwayne and a few key team members. As he sat at the long table, surrounded by executives, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in how far the hotel had come. The board members had long been skeptical, but now they were listening. Richard Thornton, the head of the board, was seated at the head of the table. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Mark. "Mark," Richard began, his voice calm but firm, "the wellness retreat was impressive. The influencers, the media coverage, it's all been positive. But now, we need to take this to the next level. We've done the groundwork, but we need to make sure we can sustain the momentum." Mark nodded, feeling the weight of Richard's words. "Absolutely. We've been focusing on expanding our offerings and increasing our marketing reach. We're looking at creating exclusive events and partnerships that align with our luxury brand. I believe this will help us build a consistent stream of high-profile guests." "Good," Richard said, making a note on his tablet. "But we need to see the numbers. The next few months are critical. If you're going to continue to get our backing, we need measurable results." Mark didn't flinch. "I understand. We've already started tracking our bookings, guest satisfaction, and social media engagement. We'll continue refining our strategies, and I'm confident that we'll see substantial growth." Richard paused, then looked around the table. "All right, we'll give you the support you need, but it's up to you to execute. You've proven that you can turn things around, but the real test is keeping this hotel at the top." Mark felt a surge of determination. "We'll do whatever it takes." In the weeks that followed, Mark's focus was laser-sharp. He and his team poured their efforts into elevating the hotel's brand and expanding their offerings. They formed strategic partnerships with luxury brands, launched exclusive themed events, and continued to strengthen relationships with influencers and high-profile clients. The hotel's presence on social media exploded, and the influx of positive reviews poured in. Dwayne, ever the skeptic, was finally showing signs of optimism. "Mark, I have to admit it," Dwayne said one evening after a particularly successful event. "I didn't think you'd pull it off. But you've managed to turn this place around." Mark grinned. "We're not done yet. We've still got a lot of work to do, but this is just the beginning." Then, one afternoon, Mark was called into Dwayne's office. As he walked in, Dwayne was standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline. He turned when Mark entered. "Mark, I wanted to talk to you about something," Dwayne said, his voice serious. Mark raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" "I've been in talks with Richard and the board. They're impressed with what you've done here. But I think it's time we discuss something bigger," Dwayne said, his gaze steady. Mark was intrigued. "What do you mean?" "We're looking at expanding. There's an opportunity to acquire another property in the area. It's a larger venue, more upscale, and it would allow us to cater to a broader clientele. The board's willing to invest, but they're leaving it up to you. If you think we're ready for something like this, we could take the hotel to the next level." Mark's mind raced. This was the kind of opportunity that could solidify their position in the luxury market for years to come. But it was also a huge risk. Acquiring another property would mean more responsibility, more staff, and more pressure. He took a deep breath. "Let's do it," he said, his voice steady. "I'm confident we're ready." In the following months, the team began working on the acquisition, preparing for the next phase of the hotel's growth. As they expanded their reach, Mark couldn't help but reflect on everything they had accomplished. The journey from near failure to success had been filled with ups and downs, but now, with the board's support and the hotel's growing reputation, it felt like they were on the verge of something truly extraordinary. As he stood in the lobby one evening, watching the guests enjoy the luxurious atmosphere, Mark realized that this was more than just a business venture. This hotel had become his passion, his purpose, and he was just getting started. The journey wasn't over yet. In fact, it was only just beginning. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon when Mark walked into the conference room, his mind racing with the weight of the decision before him. This was no longer about simply keeping the hotel afloat or maintaining the status quo. This was about taking everything to the next level. The acquisition of a larger property could mean greater recognition, more prestige, and an undeniable foothold in the luxury market. But it would also bring risk, uncertainty, and more challenges than he could possibly anticipate. He sat down at the head of the table, looking at the familiar faces of his team, Samantha, Dwayne, and a few key executives who had been with him since the very beginning. They were all waiting for him to speak, to offer his vision for the next phase of their journey. Mark cleared his throat. All right, everyone, I know this decision isn't easy. The board has given us their backing, but now we need to decide if we're ready to take on a project of this scale. Acquiring this property will put us in a completely different league. We'll have to ramp up operations, hire more staff, and expand our services to accommodate a larger, more diverse clientele. It's going to be a challenge. Samantha, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak up. I think we're ready. We've proven that we can handle high-profile events and attract the right kind of guests. The retreat, the influencer marketing, it's all working. If we don't capitalize on this momentum, someone else will. Dwayne, who had been quiet up until now, leaned forward. I agree with Samantha, but I'm not going to lie. This is a huge risk. Expanding into a larger space means more moving parts. It could stretch our resources thin, and if it fails, we could be back at square one. Mark nodded, understanding the concerns. I know it's a big leap, but I've been thinking about this for weeks. If we want to be more than just a boutique hotel, we need to start thinking on a larger scale. I'm confident in our team, and I believe we can manage the logistics. We've got the right partners, the right marketing strategies, and most importantly, the momentum. There was a pause as everyone considered his words. Mark could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. He was the one who would ultimately have to make the call, and while part of him wanted to go for it, take the risk and reach for the stars, another part of him knew how much was riding on this move. Failure was not an option. What's the timeline? Samantha asked, breaking the silence. How soon are we talking about starting? Mark pulled out a detailed proposal from his bag and slid it across the table. I've already spoken to the real estate team. If we move quickly, we can close on the acquisition within the next month. We'll need to start planning for renovations immediately after that, so we're ready to open the new property in the next 6 months. Dwayne frowned, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. 6 months? That's a tight turnaround. We'd have to completely revamp the staffing, hire a whole new team, and get the marketing campaign up and running. Plus, we'll have to ensure the current hotel operations don't suffer during the transition. Mark met his gaze, a sense of determination in his eyes. I know it's tight, but we've got a solid plan. We'll keep the existing hotel running smoothly while we prepare for the expansion. I'll be hands-on in overseeing everything. We've got the resources to pull it off. After a few moments of tense silence, Samantha spoke up again. All right, Mark. I trust you. Let's do it. Dwayne looked around at the team, then nodded reluctantly. All right, let's make it happen. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategic planning. Mark and his team worked tirelessly to finalize the acquisition. They met with architects to design the layout of the new space, worked with the marketing team to develop a rebranding strategy, and began scouting for new staff to handle the increased operations. The pressure was mounting, but Mark was focused. He had already proven that he could turn the hotel around once, and he was determined to do it again, on an even larger scale. The new property was even more luxurious than Mark had expected, spanning several acres, with sweeping views of the ocean and state-of-the-art facilities. But it was also a massive undertaking. There was a lot of work to be done before it could open its doors to the public. Mark felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him, but at the same time, he couldn't ignore the excitement that simmered beneath the surface. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. He knew that if they could successfully integrate the new property into their brand, it would change everything. A few days later, Mark received a call from Richard Thornton, who had been kept in the loop on the expansion plans. Richard had been pleased with the progress so far, but there was one thing he needed to discuss. Mark, I've been thinking about your plans for the new property, Richard began. I think you're on the right track, but there's something you should be aware of. You're going to face some serious competition in the market. The luxury hotel industry is more crowded than ever, and the larger you get, the harder it will be to maintain your unique appeal. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He had anticipated some challenges, but hearing it from Richard, who had decades of experience in the industry, made it feel more real. What do you mean? Mark asked, trying to stay calm. Once you scale up, You'll lose some of the intimacy and exclusivity that made your hotel so appealing in the first place, Richard explained. People come to places like yours for more than just luxury. They come for the experience. You'll need to ensure that the bigger property doesn't dilute that special feeling. Mark took a deep breath, processing Richard's words. I understand, but we've built a brand that's about more than just luxury. It's about providing personalized, unforgettable experiences. I'm committed to ensuring that we don't lose sight of that. Richard was silent for a moment. I believe you, Mark. Just make sure that you don't compromise on the things that made you successful in the first place. As the weeks passed, Mark's resolve only strengthened. He was more determined than ever to make the expansion work while preserving the heart of what made their hotel unique. The pressure continued to mount, but with each milestone they achieved, Mark knew they were on the right track. One afternoon, as he toured the new property, he stopped to look out at the ocean, the wind blowing gently through his hair. It was hard to believe how far they had come, from the brink of disaster to this moment of potential greatness. But as he stood there, staring out over the horizon, Mark knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The real challenge, the real test, would come once the doors opened and the world saw what they had created. But he was ready. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to stop now. The grand opening of the new property was just days away, and Mark stood in the lobby of the original hotel, staring out the window at the city below. The energy of the past few months was both exhilarating and exhausting. The acquisition had been completed, renovations were on schedule, and the marketing team had worked tirelessly to ensure that the opening would be an event to remember. But as the day drew nearer, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much more to be done. He checked his watch, then his phone for the 100th time that morning. The team had been working around the clock, and now it was up to him to keep everything on track. Samantha walked in, her usual calm demeanor in place. She smiled at him. You're doing it again, Mark. Mark looked up, slightly startled. What do you mean? You're overthinking it. We're ready. The property looks incredible. The marketing campaign is in place. The staff is trained. All we need to do now is open the doors and show the world what we've built. Mark nodded slowly. I know. It's just, this feels like the moment that defines everything. If we get it right, the hotel will be known worldwide. But if we don't, all of this, the hard work, the risks, it could all be for nothing. Samantha placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You've already proven you can turn things around. This is just the next step. You've got this. Mark took a deep breath. Thanks, Sam. You're right. It's just, this hotel means everything to me. Samantha smiled. And it shows. Let's make it count. As Mark and the team arrived at the new property on the day of the grand opening, the excitement in the air was palpable. The property had undergone a complete transformation, now standing as a beacon of luxury and innovation. From the gleaming marble floors to the expansive infinity pool overlooking the ocean, everything was designed to impress. The grand ballroom was filled with dozens of elegant tables, each covered in pristine white linens, with crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. Everything had to be perfect. The event was being broadcast live across social media, with influencers and media personalities in attendance to help spread the word. The guests were a mix of high-profile celebrities, luxury brand executives, and international media outlets eager to capture the hotel's debut. Mark and his team had carefully curated the guest list, ensuring that the opening night would generate the kind of buzz they needed. But even as the evening unfolded with flawless execution, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. It was the culmination of everything he had worked for, and yet, the stakes had never been higher. He stood by the front doors, greeting guests as they arrived. He smiled for the cameras and exchanged pleasantries, but his mind was racing. His heart skipped a beat when he saw Dwayne entering the ballroom, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. Dwayne had been his biggest critic and the one who had always pushed him to do more. But tonight, it felt different. There was a quiet pride in Dwayne's eyes as he walked toward Mark. You've outdone yourself, Dwayne said, shaking Mark's hand. This place is incredible. Mark smiled, the tension in his chest finally beginning to ease. Thanks. I couldn't have done it without you. Dwayne nodded, his usual stoic expression softening. It's been a hell of a ride. hasn't it? Mark chuckled. You don't know the half of it. As the evening wore on, Mark began to feel the weight of the event lifting from his shoulders. The guests were enjoying themselves, the food was exquisite, and the entertainment had everyone talking. The opening was a success, and the media coverage was beyond anything they had hoped for. The hotel's social media accounts were flooded with posts, tagging the hotel's stunning features and the exclusive event. By the time the night wound down, Mark took a moment to step outside onto the terrace. The cool breeze off the ocean was a welcome relief after the intensity of the day. He leaned against the railing, gazing out at the vast, sparkling waters below. For the first time in what felt like forever, Mark felt a sense of peace. But it wasn't just the success of the night that made him feel this way. It was the realization that the hotel had become more than just a business venture. It had become his passion, his legacy. And now, with the grand opening behind them, the hotel was poised to become a beacon of luxury, offering unique experiences for its guests, just as he had envisioned. He was interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see Dwayne, holding a glass of champagne. He walked over and handed it to Mark with a knowing smile. "To new beginnings," Dwayne said. Mark accepted the glass and clinked it with Dwayne's. "To new beginnings," he echoed. The two men stood there for a moment, watching the waves crash against the shore, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt. Competing hotels, evolving guest expectations, and the constant pressure to innovate. But Mark felt ready. With his team by his side and the lessons learned from his journey, he knew they could overcome anything. As the night continued and the guests reveled in the luxury of the new hotel, Mark reflected on everything that had led him to this point. It had been a long road, filled with highs and lows, but now, standing in this beautiful space, he could see that it had all been worth it. He raised his glass once more, feeling a sense of gratitude fill him from head to toe. "Thank you," he whispered to no one in particular. "Thank you for everything."